Chapter 655. Huang Xiaoya knew that she only had one chance. She would rather risk her grandfather's punishment and stick to her bottom line. She was a swordsman. Of course, she was not now, but she would definitely be in the future. Since she was a swordsman, she should always stick to her own will and not be swayed by others. Even if it was her own grandfather, she could not persist at home, because the old man had countless ways to deal with her. Her chance was right outside, on the way out with her aunt. Huang Xiaoya was very depressed. The dragon boat competition this time came too suddenly. If she had known that there would be such a calamity, she would have avoided it long ago. No matter how difficult the swordsman team was, they could still find a replacement. Unfortunately, the news came in a hurry, and her grandfather did not care about her feelings at all. He patted his chest and promised the Huang clan to produce a Qi refinement warrior. In the end, she was trapped inside. Even if she wanted to run, how could it be too late? But a Qi refinement warrior, under the care of a foundation establishment cultivator, how many chances would there be? Galloping all the way, no accidents happened. During the Dragon God Festival, everyone's temper was exceptionally good. Even if Huang Xiaoya tried several times without leaving a trace, such as charging her horse into others, knocking over roadside vendors, and quarreling with others, she could not get rid of her aunt's meaningful surveillance. She knew that she could not go too far. If she went too far, she would really be dragged to the registration area by her aunt. At that time, she would have no chance at all. Huang Xiaoya placed her hopes on the place where the dragon boat set off, because there were enough people there and enough opportunities. The gathering of hundreds of thousands of people was not something that a foundation establishment cultivator could fully monitor. This was her last chance. No matter whether the opportunity was good or not, she would take action. She could not wait any longer. The heavens were like this. When there was plenty of time along the way, the heavens did not give her a chance. But when she decided to take advantage of the crowd to forcefully escape at the scene of the competition, the opportunity quietly came. Because she had her own thoughts and intentions, Huang Xiaoya paid special attention to the people she met along the way, especially the cultivators. Her thoughts were very simple. Only by extorting money from cultivators could she create a real dispute and create an opportunity to escape. However, her efforts along the way had disappointed her. First, there were very few cultivators among the mortals. Second, when the other cultivators saw the small flying sword on the ant's robe behind her, they immediately retreated from the resentment they had. In a land of exile, at least on the surface, no one dared to challenge the swordsmen from the autonomous world. They had been taught too many lessons, and tens of thousands of years were enough to teach them something. But this time, she made a new discovery. It was a young man who was drinking in a shed by the roadside. He sat alone and wore the most common clothes in the land of exile. Although he had a sunny appearance and eyes that shone like stars, he still could not be called a crane in a flock of chickens. He blended into the sea of people and blended into the crowd. She noticed two things. One was the hair. The style of hairstyle in the land of exile was not much different from that of the main world. It was all about growing hair, and depending on the environment and the occasion, one status would determine whether it was a tall hat, a Taoist hat, a small hat, a small hat, a hat, and so on. This person did not wear a hat. His long hair was simply tied up with a hairpin and draped over his shoulders. It was the most common hairstyle for scholars and talented people. It was chic and unruly. In this Dragon God Festival, men dressed like this could be found everywhere, so it was not surprising. The difference was in the quality of the hair. Ordinary mortals would walk for several days, and their hair would be covered in oil, dandruff, and dust. No matter how diligent they were in taking care of it, it would still be distinguishable at a glance. It was not as good as cultivators who could control their bodily functions, always keeping their hair smooth and flowing with the wind. Looking at the quality of this person's hair, it was clear that he was a cultivator. His realm was unknown, but from his aura, it was likely that he was a Qi cultivator like her. The hairpin was inserted diagonally, not upright as it was under normal circumstances. The result of this insertion method was that the hair was not draped over the back, but fell over the left and right shoulders. The reason why Huang Xiaoya paid attention to this point was because she had only seen this hairpin insertion method on her grandfather. There was also once when her grandfather was in a good mood at a family gathering and asked about it. Only then did she know that this insertion method was to ensure that the hair would not be cut off by the flying sword when the sword case was unsheathed. Therefore, it had to be inserted diagonally, letting the hair fall over the left and right shoulders. This was a habit. Although it was inadvertent for an intelligent woman like her, it was not difficult to find out as long as she paid attention. Could it be that he was also a swordsman chi cultivator who came to participate in the dragon boat race? She was not completely sure, but there was always a possibility. Would she get pregnant if she asked, "Brother, are you a fellow cultivator who came to participate in the dragon boat race?" This little girl pays her respects. Lu Xiaoyi turned his head, and a young woman with bright eyes appeared in his line of sight. She was in the bud and was in the prime of her youth. However, there was obviously an elder behind her that caught his eye. As she walked, she swayed and swayed gracefully, her waves surging. "Not really. I'm just going to take a look and feel it. Well, with my cultivation, I may not meet the requirements of the competition." Lu Xiaoyi really came to watch the fun. With his cultivation, he could actually hide in the sky and look down. It was more panoramic, but he lost the feeling of the atmosphere. If he flew at a low altitude, was he looking at the dragon boat? Or was the audience looking at him? Therefore, he simply landed far away and walked on foot. Being in touch with the mortal world, he could also adjust his mood. He was not worried about being discovered by others, so he put away the sword case. As for the aura of his cultivation, he had now made progress in the cultivation method of the stars. He began to understand an additional ability of the cultivation method of the stars, the silence of stars. This was the ability to disperse one's aura to the stars that one had comprehended. Now, he had comprehended close to 2,000 stars. Therefore, when his aura was spread out through the 2,000 stars, he would reach the level of a chi refinement warrior below the foundation establishment. This was the aura concealment technique, which was much more advanced than the spirit concealment technique. It was not deliberate at all, but natural. Only a top-notch technique like the Big Dipper scripture could do it. He was not lying when he said that he did not meet the requirements of the competition. Of course, a Jean Dan could not participate in the activities of a chi cultivator. Wasn't this bullying? However, Huang Xiaoyi had obviously misunderstood. She had a preconceived notion that this person was a chi cultivator. Perhaps he had not reached the peak of chi cultivator. What was so important about this? It was not like he was lacking in this little bit. She saw hope, a hope of substituting one thing for another. She still needed to verify it. "Brother, are you a swordsman? Are you from the main world?" These words were very rude, but also depended on who said it. If it was an innocent girl with bright eyes, then it was fine to be rude, right? Huang Xiaoyi was very good at making use of her assets. Her eyes and frown had the innocence of a young girl. This was also her goal. If she did not want to be seen by millions of people, then it was not bad to sacrifice a little for the person in front of her. Anyway, this person was not bad, so she would not lose out. Chapter 656. Lu Xiaoyi was gentle and refined. He had this foundation. He came from a big family, so there was no need to pretend, especially in front of these two beauties. One had been touched by a pig, and the other had not. He was a kind person. "Oh, how did you find out, miss? Is my performance very obvious?" Huang Xiaoyi smiled, but did not answer. Her face was full of pride, but Daffodil Luluodafa came over to greet him. She was a foundation establishment cultivator and considered herself an elder, but Lu Xiaoyi would not call her aunt. In terms of age, they had to call him great-grandfather. In the cultivation world, age was not the only thing that mattered. The more one talked about it, the more chaotic it became. "I see that little brother is not far from the peak of chi refining. You also have the qualifications to participate. Young people should be brave enough to hit the water. Why did you abandon the boat and not fight? Which family are you from? Tell me, maybe I know your elders." How could Lu Xiaoyi know the real situation of the nearby swordsman family? There was no way to make up a lie. If she casually asked for a person's name, he would be exposed, so he simply shut up and laughed. Huang Xiaoya immediately found the problem with her unique way of thinking. You didn't hide because you didn't want to participate in the dragon boat race, did you? I knew it was like this. Otherwise, with so many swordsman families, how could it be my turn to stand out? This is not fair. Lu Xiaoyi found that women were not scary when they talked to themselves. What was scary was that they wanted to prove themselves. He did not say anything, but the two women had already filled in his background, experience, reason, purpose, and so on. It was really others who said things about him that made him speechless. He still did not understand the purpose of the two women. It might be a misunderstanding. Maybe the girl was complaining that she did not want to participate in such a boat race, but this had nothing to do with him. It was best if the girl went to row the boat. He could also get closer to her aunt. Therefore, he did not refute, but only laughed, which made Huang Xiaoya even more certain. However, she was from a swordsman family, so she still had the minimum vigilance. Let me see your sword talisman. Half coquettish, half threatening. You can't just show it to anyone. Lu Xiaoyi was afraid that taking out would scare them, because his sword talisman was a Xianyuan core disciple's sword talisman, which was unique to the Sword Qi Rushing Heaven Pavilion. It was not the same as the ordinary Xianyuan sword talisman. He was afraid that once he took it out, he would expose himself and lose this beautiful misunderstanding. He would become an elder and lose the fun. In order to show fairness, she first took out her own sword talisman, and then forced her aunt to take out her sword talisman. When Lu Xiaoyi saw this, he almost laughed out loud. There were simply two fakes, probably made by the Huang family herself. There was a trace of the Huang family's sword aura on it, and it could only be used to scare people in the land of exile. Perhaps it was recognized by the swordsman families here, but in the main world, it was nothing. If you don't take it out, I'll punish you for impersonating a Xianyuan swordsman. Failing to seduce him, Huang Xiaoya immediately changed it to a threat. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he couldn't be angry. After all, she only wanted to form a good relationship with him, so he had no choice but to take out his sword talisman and flash it. He even deliberately concealed the aura within it. Of course, the aura of the sword talisman couldn't be hidden, so the two women confirmed his identity. However, Huang Xiaoya was very unconvinced. Why is your sword talisman so exquisite? Its aura is also much stronger. No, when I go back, I have to ask Grandpa to make me another one. Seeing that the two women were indifferent to the sword talisman, Lu Xiaoyi immediately understood where the problem was. These two wooden hammers must have never seen the real Xianyuan sword talisman, so they were completely unable to understand the truth. It was understandable that they had stayed in the land of exile for their entire lives, and their family lived alone, so how could there be an atmosphere of the sword vein? He didn't say anything, and only said a few words. Maybe the sword talisman of a male is more exquisite? It would have been better if Huang Xiaoya didn't hear this, but after hearing this, she became angry. Male? What's wrong with a male? The benefits are all yours, but you want us women to row the boat? Yet you came here to hide and relax. Lu Xiaoyi finally understood her intentions, but he couldn't help her with this kind of thing. When the time comes, I'll wave the flag and cheer for you. Who wants you to cheer for me? Although Huang Xiaoya said that, she immediately had a plan in her heart. There were still 2 days left. Time was a bit tight, but it wasn't completely impossible. She decided to use a beauty trap and encourage this guy to take her place in the boat race. This was the perfect result. She didn't need to personally get on the boat, and her grandfather wouldn't blame her. It was the best of both worlds. A beauty trap was not very useful for cultivators, especially for cultivators with higher realms. If a mere woman could tempt them, then this Dao could be considered a dog's body. But at lower realms, it was different. For example, Foundation establishment cultivators had the need to become Dao companions, so their resistance to this aspect was weaker. Even Foundation establishment cultivators were like this, not to mention Qi refinement warriors. Strictly speaking, Qi refinement warriors were not cultivators at all. They didn't even have magic power. They were in a state where their bodies were becoming stronger but their minds had not yet caught up. This was a transitional stage between cultivators and mortals, and it was especially easy for them to be tempted by women. There were still 3 days left, and Huang Xiaoya felt that she could do it. Since everyone is of the same bloodline, then let's go together. We can also take care of each other. Lu Xiaoyi gladly accepted the order. Having a beauty with him was much more interesting than being alone. But after only 1 day, Huang Xiaoya knew that her plan might not work. Love was a woman's talent, and they had a natural desire to perform. Jealousy was also a woman's specialty, and they had a terrifying intuition about it. In just 1 day, Huang Xiaoya felt that this guy who came from an unknown family was very perverted. He actually looked at her aunt more than her. I treat you as a friend, and you actually want to be my uncle? She decided to change her plan. Although she was a little disappointed, she had a big goal. She also wanted to go further on the path of cultivation, so she was very resistant to marriage. Her family always gave her pressure in this aspect, but she had her grandfather to support her, so she was not afraid of anyone. This was the only thing that satisfied her about the old man from the Huang family. Since she wasn't attractive enough, then she could only persuade her aunt to do it. But although her aunt doted on her, she couldn't possibly give her body for this, right? She also wouldn't push her family into the arms of others for her own reasons. Luckily, it was just a loan. Aunt Water Immortal was a foundation establishment cultivator, so why would she be afraid of this perverted guy doing something bad? She needed to set up a trap, a simple one. It would give her a chance to escape, and at the same time, because her aunt had this brat as a scapegoat, she wouldn't specially come after her. Huang Xiaoya's little brain started to work, and she carefully calculated. Chapter 657. Seeing that the river was right in front of them, the three of them found 2 inns and spent a lot of money to book 2 rooms for them to rest in. Now was the beginning of the Dragon God Festival, and it was hard to find a room, so they could only split it into 2. Of course, cultivators did not need this kind of rest. It was noisy with so many people, so they might as well meditate in the wild. However, Chi refinement warriors were not as good. Moreover, where was there a quiet place by the river? Lu Xiaoyi was reading by the window when the door was pushed open roughly. Water deity walked in with her eyebrows raised, pointing at Lu Xiaoyi. Damn pervert, give me back my corset. Lu Xiaoyi was very innocent. What corset? I've never seen it before. Water deity, if you want me to buy it for you, can't you just say so? Why do you have to beat around the bush? Water deity, the Annie, swept her phoenix eyes and found a bag of miscellaneous items on the couch. She walked over and shook it, and a pink silk bundle was shaken out just like that. She was born in a barbarian land, after all, so she did not feel that there was anything wrong with carrying her private things like this. She just stared at Lu Xiaoyi. What is this? Do you still want to deny it? Lu Xiaoyi saw and knew what was going on. Just now, Huang Xiaoyi came to his room to chat and left him a scarf for him to wave during the dragon bow competition, thinking that she supported him. Although this kind of little girl's sentiments were very childish, considering her age and the fact that her state of mind was low, he could only acquiesce. As for whether he would wave it or not, with so many people, who would know? For a grown man to wave this thing in the crowd, it was really embarrassing. Ever since Huang Xiaoya left, he had not opened it to take a look. Who knew that there was actually such a thing in the bag? Even if he was Jean Dan's divine sense, how could he distinguish between a scarf and a silk bundle of the same material? As for the faint fragrance on it, he only thought that it was the smell of a girl and did not think too much about it. In the end, he was successfully framed by this cunning girl. Thus, he sighed. These 2 were really something that made people speechless. Auntie, don't be impatient. If I were you, I would go back and see if your Huang Xiaoyi is still there. Water deity was startled, but immediately came to her senses. Just like the wind that came, the fire that left. By the time she had crossed more than half of the town and arrived at her guest room, there was no one in the room. It was empty. The room was empty. He then leaped onto the roof and looked around. All around him were human heads. There were at least 10,000 people. The closer he got to the river, the more there were. He was afraid that there were at least 100,000 people. How could they find someone in such an environment? Fortunately, she still had a record. She had planted a special fragrance on that wretched girl's body, so she could use it to find her whereabouts. Therefore, she set out to find the fragrance, identifying the scent and following it. After tossing and turning for an hour, she came to an abrupt halt. That little girl was very crafty. She had long been familiar with her methods. Not only did she erase the fragrance that she had put on her, but she also applied the same fragrance on other people. She had tried several times to find the wrong person. In this situation, it was impossible to find him. She knew that the wretched girl was unwilling, but she didn't think that she would dare to do such a decisive thing. She dared to disregard the orders of the ancestor, her father-in-law. She was only a foundation establishment stage cultivator and a native of the exile. She hadn't seen much of the world, and even less had come into contact with the complexity of the outside world. Because of their close relationship, it was normal for her methods to be broken by the little girl. Although the ancestor of her family was strict, he had given his granddaughter many treasures to protect her. Therefore, there was now an awkward situation. No matter how much trouble Huang Xiaoya made, no matter how overboard she was, her surname was still Huang. However, her surname wasn't Huang. She was an outsider. Her husband had passed away early and didn't even leave behind any children. If she really went back to report, it was hard to say what the wretched girl would do to her. Her father-in-law was very strict. He didn't recognize anyone but the rules. At this point, she couldn't help but think of the last few words that the wretched girl said. The way this unknown swordsman looked at her was very different. She was also a woman, so she agreed with Xiaoya's observation. Today, she was secretly pleased with herself. She felt that she still had her youth and charm. But she didn't expect that she would have to use her charm so soon. That wretched girl was very accurate about one thing. The best way for everyone to get through this difficult situation was to let this swordsman substitute one person for another. This matter wasn't difficult. The Huang family didn't report the names and genders of the participants. Cultivators weren't so rigid and old-fashioned. They emphasized self-discipline. Now the problem was, how could she persuade him? Threaten him first, then seduce him. This was the decision of Aunt Shui Xian. It had to be said that if they weren't a family, they wouldn't enter the same house. In terms of methods, she and Huang Xiaoya weren't fundamentally different. She needed to go back as soon as possible. Otherwise, if this boy ran away, she would really lose all her eggs and have no room to turn around. Lu Xiaoyi didn't run away. Why did he run away? The torment of these two lunatics was just an interlude in his viewing of the Dragon Boat Convention. Until Shui Xian came back and fiercely barged in again. You must represent my Huang family in the Dragon Boat Convention. Without you, Xiaoya wouldn't have run away. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't surprised that Huang Xiaoya stood him up, but he didn't want to do anything about it. His spiritual sense was enough to ensure that he could find Huang Xiaoya soon after she left. What was the point? If he did, Huang Xiaoya wouldn't be happy. If he didn't, Shui Xian wouldn't be happy. It was all trouble. Aunt's words are a bit unreasonable. Your Huang family's own business. Why do you have to put on an outsider like me? Do you think my family is easy to bully? Hurry up and find him. Don't waste time here with me. I'm trapped. It wasn't easy for me to escape. I don't want to fall into it again. Shui Xian fiercely said, You, a little chi refinement cultivator, dare to talk nonsense in front of me? I'm afraid you haven't tasted the methods of foundation establishment, right? If you don't listen to me, do you believe that I'll make you regret it for the rest of your life? Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but laugh. What? Does Annie want to strangle me with that corset? Shui Xian tossed and turned for a long time, but still couldn't convince this stubborn guy. The key was that she didn't have any effective means of torturing people. What she learned came from the sword vein. The sword vein didn't have any research on these unorthodox methods. When it came to her, there was nothing. She didn't dare to use the ruthless methods of the sword vein. The dragon boat race was close at hand. What if her body was injured? Moreover, the other party was another swordsman family. Was it better to break her promise at the dragon boat race or to become enemies with another sword vein family? She wasn't confused. The former was just a punishment. The latter was very likely to lead to death. She had no choice but to use the second method, which was seduction. Fortunately, this guy's appearance was decent and not disgusting. Moreover, for a woman like her who came from a remote place, she was far less repulsed by this kind of thing than the people of the Central Plains. So she immediately changed her face. "Little brother, can't you help me? If you like corsets, just take them. What else do you want? I'll satisfy you." Lu Xiaoyi never thought that things would develop in such a strange direction, but he didn't refuse. "If you say so, I won't be sleepy anymore." Chapter 658. The next day, a refreshed Lu Xiaoyi walked out of his room after the sun was high in the sky, followed by a somewhat tired water deity. She didn't expect that this guy was someone who didn't care about emotions and only pursued practicality. He wouldn't act unless he saw a rabbit, and wouldn't speak unless he saw benefits didn't matter. Between a cultivator and a man, they would just treat it as dual cultivation. The key was to achieve their goal. "Damn it, it's time to register. It'll be too late if you wait any longer," Water Deity urged. Lu Xiaoyi was very hesitant. "Didn't we agree that I would row the boat for 5 days and change it 5 times? This is only the first time." Water Deity was annoyed. "Record it down and return it when you come back. How can we still make it in time? I'm warning you, if you go back on your word and play tricks, don't blame me for looking for your family and ruining your reputation." The development of the situation was getting stranger and stranger. In fact, Water Deity wasn't completely forced. After all, she had been a widow for a long time and still had needs. She didn't dare to act recklessly in her family, but outside, she met a rather outstanding young man. Both were willing. However, the most important thing now was to register her name first. "What's your name? I still don't know it." Water Deity realized that she had been very muddle-headed this night. She didn't have the calmness of a Foundation establishment cultivator at all. She had already done that, but she didn't even know his name. Lu Xiaoyi was very pleased with himself, but he still didn't reveal his true identity. It wasn't that he was ruthless, but it wasn't appropriate to lie. It would be troublesome if he told the truth. "Is my name that important? What's important is the name of the Huang family's participant. You could just randomly pick a name from the Huang family. Why are you asking me?" Water Deity was so angry that her teeth itched. He was still so irresponsible after eating his fill. However, there was no other way. The situation was urgent. She had to get through this hurdle first. Thus, she registered her name and used the Huang family's sword talisman. Everything went smoothly. All of this was seen by Huang Xiaoya, who was hiding on a mountain far away. She finally heaved a sigh of relief and secretly admired her aunt. How did she make this blockhead change his personality? She didn't know what price her aunt had paid. After all, Huang Xiaoya was a girl who had yet to build her Taoist foundation. Her temperament was limited. She ran away happily, but after running away, she began to worry. She was worried that the boy would not listen to her, worried that something would happen to her aunt, worried about her family's reputation, and worried about her grandfather's punishment. If Lu Xiaoyi didn't show up in the end, she would probably take the initiative to walk up and bear her own responsibility. There were limits to rebellion. But now everything was resolved. Everything was calm, and everything was going smoothly. She decided to find a place to have some fun and then quietly wait for the dragon boat race to begin. The dragon boat was 120 feet long and 5 feet wide. It was custom-made and could not be changed. Only the dragon heads were of different shapes and colors. 20 Qi refinement warriors waited bare-chested. They sat on the left and right sides of the oars. The oars were 30 feet long, and the widest part was close to a foot. When the oars moved, only strong men could move freely. Among the 20 people, only 18 people were controlling the oars. One person at the dragon head stood with his back to the oars. He was responsible for beating the drum and controlling the rhythm of the oars. At the stern of the boat, one person was steering the boat. More than 400 dragon boats were lined up in the middle of the river. It was a magnificent sight. It was very simple to keep the boats in line. In the middle of the river, there was an iron lock. The tail of each dragon boat was connected to the iron lock. When the gong sounded, everyone would move forward side by side and start the race. Lu Xiaoyi sat in the boat. He didn't look different from the others. Although he was now more than 300 years old, time did not leave any trace on his face. The silence of the stars also made it impossible to see any abnormality in his cultivation. The people in charge here were basically at the level of foundation establishment. The limited vision of a Fugene Dan was not enough to see the real situation of the top-level magic. If Yuan was here, she might be able to see it. Unfortunately, there was no one here. How did he end up here with a group of Qi refinement warriors? Until now, he still couldn't figure it out. He was just here to join in the fun, but in the end, he became a participant. It was funny. He didn't feel that there was anything to be embarrassed about. He was a young man, so what was wrong with that? Moreover, the thank you gift was very tempting. Thinking of the 4 rewards later, it was worth it to work hard on the boat. He liked this kind of adventure. It was natural and bizarre. He didn't have to worry about the beginning and the end. It was neat and tidy, and everyone was willing, of course. He would never use power beyond the Qi refinement warriors in such a competition, even if their dragon boat couldn't rank in the top 10. This was the principle of a cultivator at his level. He could participate, but he wouldn't change the result. The dragon boat race had been going on for a few days. After eating, drinking, and playing, the popularity began to accumulate slowly. The finale was about to begin. On Lu Xiaoyi's boat, the most experienced people were the drummers on the dragon's head and the helmsman on the dragon's tail. It was not their first time participating in a race, so they had experience in boat racing. This was also the standard of almost all dragon boat teams. The paddlers were just using stupid strength. A good helmsman could lead them to the most reasonable path, while a drummer could mobilize everyone's emotions at the critical moment and maintain a reasonable rhythm of sprinting and accumulating power. The time had come. With a gong, the tail hook of the dragon boat fell off. More than 400 dragon boats were like arrows shooting out in competition. This was also the most chaotic time. No matter how wide the river was, it couldn't avoid the collision between the blades of the dragon boats. In order to compete for position, no one gave in. This was the biggest attraction of the dragon boat's starting point. The children of the swordsman family still had solid basic skills, and they valued explosive power very much. Therefore, they still had a lot of advantages in the starting point. They basically stayed in the top 100. As the distance between each other widened, it was the real beginning. 3,000 miles was a competition of strength. Blindly attacking and exploding was not enough. Lu Xiaoyi paddled unhurriedly, maintaining the same rhythm and frequency as the others. It was not so much a race as a view of the scenery. The same scenery, overlooking from the sky and looking up from the boat, were 2 different experiences. Being in a group, paddling in the low and powerful drumming, watching the scenery on both sides of the river pass by quickly, and listening to the thunderous shouts of the audience. It was also a different artistic conception. Momentum, power, speed, turbulence, whirlpools, and shoals. When all these were combined, a wonderful rhythm emerged in the mind, leaving a rich aftertaste. Even the activities of Qi trainers had their own true meaning. The existence of Tao was not limited to the realm. Lu Xiaoyi was in this wonderful artistic conception. He seemed to be paddling mechanically, but in fact, he was immersed in his own perception. It was the harmony between heaven and earth, nature and human beings. One was moving and one was still, one was stretching and one was moving. The speed of the dragon boat was about 60 miles per hour. It was not easy for Qi trainers to go against the current. The delay was in some places where the water flow was complicated, but it was also the easiest place to overtake. Lu Xiaoyi was actually slacking. Chapter 659. P.S. It's the end of the month. Friends, do you still have any votes left? Since we have nothing to do, let's vote for the expired votes. From next month onwards, we will update every 500 votes. Thank you for your support. After a few days of rowing, when the Dragon Boat group was nearing the finish line, everyone no longer held back. The distance between the first and the last place had been pulled to a few hundred miles, but there were still dozens of dragon boats in the first group that were tightly clinging to each other for the final sprint. The last few hundred miles were basically flat and wide waters, which was suitable for sprinting. It was also specially arranged so that the spectators on both sides of the river were mesmerized. The swordsman's dragon boat was very special. The bow of the boat was not a dragon head, but a sword head. Of course, they were not the most special ones among all the dragon boats. There were horse heads, cow heads, chicken heads, and all kinds of strange river beast heads. There were also human heads, and there was even a half-mermaid, which was not slow at all. They represented the totems of each race and the mascots of their orthodoxies. After tens of thousands of years of the Dragon Boat Conference, it was no longer as lifeless as before. Of course, the dragon heads were still the most common. His companions were all trying their best. This was the last few hundred miles that would determine the ranking. If they did not give it their all, they would not have the chance anymore. The swordsman's sword boat was still in the 30s. This was also their usual strategy, to follow the leading boat closely and then give it their all in the end. Lu Xiaoyi certainly could not give it his all. If he did, the boat would fly. He just maintained the same effort as the others. This was his principle. When the last moment arrived, some very interesting situations appeared in his perception. In this first group, there was almost no one who did not cheat. Basically, there were foundation establishment cultivators mixed in with them, one or two, but not many. Their purpose was very simple. When the other dragon boats began to accelerate abnormally, they also had to have their own trump cards. The sword boat group was one of the few that did not cheat. This was because of their strict sect rules and the inherent pride of the swordsmen. Because they were from the same sect, and because of their profound knowledge, the combined strength of the 20 swordsmen was far superior to the motley crew. Only now did Lu Xiaoyi understand why the swordsman squad could only barely make into the top 10 in the previous swordsman squads. Sometimes, they could not even make into the top 10. The closer they got to the destination, the more intense the competition became. The speed of the sword boat had basically reached the limit of what a chi refinement warrior could achieve. The bow of the boat was raised high, and the speed was close to 100 miles per hour. But even so, there were still dragon boats that could not catch up with them. There were even dragon boats that surpassed them. For example, a blood-red dragon boat with a human head and faceless face was slowly overtaking the sword boat. The swordsman was so angry that they couldn't shake it off no matter how hard they tried. Only the stern of the dragon boat was still submerged in the water. Most of the boat's hull was raised high due to its speed, and the oarsmen at the front could only keep half of their oars in the water. This is F*King fake. But the ordinary spectators did not care about these details. They only wanted to watch the show. The more intense the show, the better. The more outstanding the strange boat, the better. In the last 10 miles, Lu Xiaoyi judged the situation. The sword boat was in 11th place. The ones at the front were all disguised as foundation establishment cultivators using force, and the ones at the back were not a threat to the sword boat for the time being. It was his first time participating in such an event. Did he have to swallow the regret of being schemed against? If everyone followed the rules, he would of course follow them too. It did not matter even if he fell out of the top 10. But if someone used this method to achieve his goal, then he was not a kind person either. The flying boat in the front was less than a mile away from the finish line. It was only a matter of 10 breaths. The blood-red dragon boat with a human head and faceless face was catching up and overtaking them continuously. It was close to the top 3. Although it was only a mile away, it was hard to say who would have the last laugh based on its performance. Of course, it had nothing to do with the sword boat. They were now in the 11th place. Unless they flew, there was no hope of surpassing them. The dragon boat behind them was also very far away. He could not violate his own principles. With Jean Dan's ability, he could accelerate the sword boat, but he could do something else. He seemed to have other ideas about how to do bad things. The paddle entered the water, and a trace of the power of the 5 elements silently mixed into the water. Through the river, it reached a distance of a mile away. Huang Xiaoya was also mixed in the crowd. Together with a few of her friends, they desperately cheered for the sword boat. She had never worked so hard before because she felt guilty. At this time, she had already begun to regret. Why did she try so hard to avoid such a boat? She could have fought for glory, for her own orthodoxy, in front of tens of thousands of people. But now the half-dead was in the 11th place. Just one more to be in the top 10 and get the blessing of the dragon god. If they were at the back, it would not matter if they were dead. But in this position, couldn't they put in a little more effort? Especially that dead man. No one would pay special attention to a specific person on a certain dragon boat, except for her. She had been staring at this guy. She had her own woman's special intuition. Looking at the wretched smile on this person's face and the calm paddle, she knew that this damned guy was not doing his best. At a time like this, he was still lazy. If she could control her sword, she would want to give this guy a good beating. Amidst the cheers of hundreds of thousands of people, the scene they liked to see the most appeared. A dragon boat suddenly appeared. It was a blood-red boat, and amidst the deafening shouts, the bow of the boat rose higher and higher, and the contact with the water became less and less. The long oars in the hands of the oarsmen in front could no longer reach the water, but their speed was getting faster and faster. In the end, under the astonished gazes of hundreds of thousands of people, the last bit of contact with the water disappeared, and the entire blood-red dragon boat flew up. Yes, it flew up in an illogical manner. The 18 oarsmen were still numbly paddling, but why did they feel that it was so easy to paddle now? Was it like they were paddling in the air? They were originally paddling in the air. Cultivation was not unfamiliar in the exile land, and it was also something that everyone knew. So now, what did the strangeness of this dragon boat mean? Even immortals had some guesses. The huge cheers turned into loud boos and boos, which made the scene particularly lively. Cheating, cheating. Huang Xiaoya's brain worked well, and she shouted loudly with several of her companions. Of course, the voices of the Qi cultivators were much louder than that of ordinary people. They quickly infected the people around them and merged into a force that quickly spread until hundreds of thousands of people shouted together. Cheating, cheating. On the blood-red flying boat, the last 3 of the 18 oarsmen were also the 3 veteran Foundation establishment cultivators arranged by the force behind them. Of course, they did not need to be too strict. Which of the dragon boats in front did not have a Foundation establishment cultivator? It was a tacit secret. They were dumbfounded and complaining to each other. Lu Lauer, don't F*King use your strength. Can't you see that the boat is flying? I F*King used my strength long ago. Wang Laowu, don't slander me. The 2 of them looked at Zheng Laoqi together, and Zheng Laoqi spread his hands. We didn't do it. It was pushed by the water. Someone secretly did it. Chapter 660. P.S. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes. In the new month, 500 monthly votes will be added. Thank you for your support. The Dragon Boat Conference came to an end, but it was not perfect because some people and some forces had crossed the line. It was a well-known secret that there were Foundation establishment stage cultivators among the Dragon Boat oarsmen. In fact, it was the practice of those powerful forces to not lose face. At the beginning, everyone still followed the rules and used the power of Qi cultivators. If others did not use any tricks, they would not use any tricks. It was a passive preparation to deal with others. But later, they slowly became active. Finally, they began to lose control during the sprint. But there was a principle. You could not let the dragon boat fly. Do you think others are blind? The result was also very simple. Under the gaze of hundreds of thousands of people, there was no way to leave it unsettled. Therefore, the blood-red dragon boat was removed from the top 10 as a punishment. The sword boat naturally became the 10th dragon boat to arrive and caught the last bus to receive the dragon boat blessing. The dragon god's blessing was a very illusory concept. Lu Xiaoyi did not want to stay here and wait for this thing. But when he wanted to leave secretly, he saw a girl in the crowd waving at him excitedly. He immediately dismissed the idea of sneaking away quietly. He could not use the ability of Jean Dan to escape now. There were several Jean Dan on the main platform, and it was difficult to completely cover up the traces. It was safer to wait for the big group to disperse and leave together. Otherwise, if he met that girl, she would be full of tricks. Did he really want to be her uncle? So he waited for a few more hours, not for anything else, but for the dragon boats behind. In this regard, The exiles were very well-mannered. Even for these losers, they would warmly welcome them. Maybe they disdained the team in front of them for cheating, so they did it deliberately? When all the dragon boats arrived, the top 200 cultivators were led to a huge dragon platform. This was not a temporary wooden platform, but an open space cut out of a stone mountain at the end of the line. There were 20 tall stone pillars around, engraved with various strange totems. According to the people next to them, these were the totems of the 20 most populous ethnic groups on the land of exile. Then, the top of the stone pillar was lit up. It was already close to evening. As the 20 torches burned fiercely, the emotions of the hundreds of thousands of spectators were stirred to the extreme. Dan walked up to the stage. Without saying anything, he lit up a symbol of fortune and disappeared into the night sky. Lu Xiaoyi found it funny. How could there be cultivators who believed in such supernatural things? Perhaps only the Aborigines would be so devout. He felt as if he was standing on the altar of the prairie people. It was also as mysterious as this. It was also the illusory belief of the outer gods, and it was also the countless crazy people below. Then he truly felt that something was descending. Perhaps in the eyes of others, this was the dragon god's blessing. However, Lu Xiaoyi knew very well that this was a blessing under the guise of the dragon god's blessing. It was exactly the same as the sacrificial ceremony of the prairie people. It was just that the prairie people's belief was a mess of deer, cows, horses, and wolves. However, in the land of exile, there was only one thing: the dragon god. The descending providence was also lifeless, as if it had not been activated. Lu Xiaoyi did not know if this providence would be activated. When would it be activated? However, there was one thing that made him very vigilant. Generally, the carriers of providence would not be able to see the unactivated providence. Only he, who had an unusually strong providence and had the colors of nature, could sense it. This was not a guess, but the result of deliberately bringing Li Pain in to see the prairie people's sacrificial ceremony before coming to the land of exile. During that ceremony, providence was still falling bit by bit, but Li Peinan, who was also a carrier of providence, did not have any reaction at all. Not all the 200 people on the stage had providence on them. There were only a few dozen wisps. How could Lu Xiaoyi not figure out the specific conditions for providence to descend on them? Was it a physical and mental compatibility of the recipient? Or was it a purposeful selection by the sender? However, he himself had obtained a wisp. This was something directly obtained from the mysterious dragon god's belief. It was different from the deathly providence that he had seized from the few prairie shamans previously. That was because he vaguely saw the AI's smiling face again. That familiar smiling face, nodding repeatedly, showing great concern. This made him shudder with fear. However, he remained calm, silently observing the reactions of every Qi refinement warrior who had obtained providence. He quickly realized that there was no difference between those who had obtained providence and those who had not. He was looking at these providence clusters from the perspective of an outsider, but he did not know if they, as the people involved, could discover it in their minds. If they could not for the time being, then what were the conditions for triggering it? Was it the upper realm every time? Or was it completely under the control of the caster? There was no time for him to think carefully. He quietly disappeared along with the crowd. No matter how hard Huang Xiaoya searched, she would never be able to find someone who could accurately determine her position and take the opposite direction in the hundreds of thousands of people. Lu Xiaoyi had long lost interest in continuing to experience the Dragon God Festival. He had even thrown the other 4 anti-daffodil events to the back of his mind. Right now, he only wanted to find a place to properly sort everything out. However, the more he wanted peace and quiet, the more he could not get it. He had not flown for dozens of miles when he could vaguely sense the aura of a spiritual vigor right in front of him. That was the aura of Jindan level. It was very unusual for it to happen so close to the Dragon God Festival. Lu Xiaoyi did not sneak in. Firstly, he could not do it. Secondly, inappropriate actions might cause others to be enlightened. Besides, he was not interested in eavesdropping on other people's privacy. Just in case, he carried the sword case on his back. With a flash, he headed straight for the center of the arena. When he arrived at the periphery of the arena, he saw a blood river in the sky that was so red that it was turning purple. This was not the Foundation establishment blood mist of the Red Sun sect that he had seen at the fish-leaping cliff, but the real blood river Great Tao. The other cultivator did not seem to be so high-profile, but there were vaguely goo worms appearing on his body. His fighting style was very strange. Even the brilliant blood river seemed to be unable to stop this person's goo worms from entering and leaving. These two orthodoxies had caused waves in the exile before. Spiritual Master Nan had even specially mentioned them. However, he had never seen them before after coming to the exile several times. It could be seen that they were very low-key. He did not expect to see them this time. There were several other cultivators watching the battle. One of them was wearing the uniform of the heaven-defying sect, and the other was Jean Dan, who was burning his talisman on the Dragon Ascension platform. Lu Xiaoyi somewhat understood. The owner of the Blood River should be the one behind the faceless blood-red dragon boat. This time, he had lost in the dragon boat competition and mistakenly thought that someone was deliberately targeting him. So he came here to seek a solution. He did not speak, nor did he interfere. He just stood aside and watched. However, not long after, the two people who were fighting jumped out of the circle. Obviously, they had sensed the approach of a stranger, and one with a sword case on his back. The cultivators of the heaven-defying sect were the first to welcome him. After all, Xinyuan Sword Sect was their main sect in name. I'm Blackstone. May I ask which superior cultivator is here? We had a conflict because of some small friction. Please forgive us. Chapter 661. Just for the blessing of the dragon god? Such an ethereal thing? Lu Xiaoyi played it down. He also wanted to know if these Jean Dan people knew anything about luck. Based on his observation, not all of them had a group of luck, so why did they care so much about the top 10? It's mainly for face. It's only held once every 10 years, and it was destroyed, so it's a bit embarrassing. There are some accumulated grievances, and I need to vent them out in a hurry. I made a fool of myself in front of you. Heisher had never seen this Xinyuan Jean Dan swordsman, but he didn't know all the Xinyuan swordsmen in the land of exile. The current heaven-defying sect was like a sieve, and it didn't matter which sect it was, so he didn't bother to distinguish. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't tell if he was hiding or telling the truth. At the Jean Dan realm, even if he had formed a false core in the land of exile, he still had some mental state. He wouldn't blush and his heart would race when he lied. It wasn't so shallow. Seeing that the other Jean Dan people also gathered around and were very polite, he didn't put on airs and return their greetings one by one. The Blood River sect and the Gu Alliance sounded like big villains, but he had never judged people by their appearance, nor did he use history to frame them. The world of cultivation was always changing. People would change, and so would the orthodoxy. How could there be good and bad people who were the same? So he said sincerely, anger is harmful to the body, and it will be a joke if the juniors see it. Moreover, this place is too close to the site of the Dragon Boat Conference. I'm afraid there will be accidental injuries, and it will cause karma. I'm Fei Chai, and I'll be a peacemaker today. Regardless of Xuanyuan's face, let's shake hands and make peace, okay? His words were more pleasing to the ears. In the land of exile, whether it was out of genuine respect or hypocrisy, the local cultivators were all somewhat afraid of Xinyuan. His strength was there, and they had no choice but to admit it. However, sword cultivators were arrogant, cold-faced, and well-disciplined. They acted as if they were the boss, making it difficult for others to get close to them. Therefore, their relationship with each other was maintained as if they minded their own business. They would not easily get involved with sword cultivator clans, but they would also keep a respectful distance from them. Take the sword cultivator today as an example. Although he was also trying to mediate, and they were fully aware that if they didn't listen to him, they would definitely use their swords. However, the way he spoke was very pleasant to the ears. It wasn't an order, and it wasn't a condescending arrogance. It was much easier to accept. The Blood River sect's Taoist cupped his fists. I'm Jiu Shui. Since Brother Xinyuan has spoken, my Blood River sect will bear with it. It's not a big deal. Fellow Taoist is right. Hurting the mortals below, or letting the children see it, it's not good. The Gu Dao cultivator also bowed. I'm by Jiao, and I have a bad temper. Although Jiao Shui is slandering me, I shouldn't lower myself to his level. Why bother? Lu Xiaoyi was terrifyingly straightforward. He also wanted to use some kind of straightforwardness to find out the truth of these natives. If he were to search for the results alone, the land of exile was so big, where would he start? It was better to beat the grass and scare the snake, or mix in with them. It was better than him searching blindly. No matter how big the conspiracy was, at least it wouldn't be now. And now, the land of exile was still firmly in Xuanyuan's hands. Hee. Both of you don't have to be suspicious of each other. The Bloodboat's flight was indeed sabotaged by someone, but it was not the first-ranked Gu boat who sabotaged it. It was me. Everyone was shocked. They did not know why he said that. In order to resolve the grudge between Blood River Sect and Gu Dao, there was no need to be so self-deprecating, right? Lu Xiaoyi explained, when I first came to the land of exile, I found the Dragon Boat Convention interesting, so by chance, I disguised myself as an oarsman and mixed in with the sword boat. But my results were not good. Just as I was about to fall out of the top 10, the blood boat flew past my sword boat majestically. I was so angry that I sent it flying. I thought it was a joke, but it caused the two of you to be so serious. I am truly ashamed. Everyone listened to him and understood the truth of the matter. They could not help laughing, including Blood River Sect's Jiao Shui. He laughed more heartily than anyone else. This was the way cultivators dealt with matters. The key wasn't who did what, but this bold style of revealing one's past was admirable. As for whether or not they obtained first place in their hearts, it was indeed just a matter of face. How could it be that important? Jiao Shui was very happy, so it was because we offended Xuanyuan's upper cultivator. My Blood River Sect was blind. We deserved to be eliminated. But Brother Fei, my Blood River Sect is definitely going to befriend you. Please don't despise my Blood River Sect for being vulgar. Bai Jin was also very happy. It was not because the injustice had been washed away, but because the other party was natural and unrestrained. He did not treat them, the heretics, as evil. This was very rare. He was willing to admit in front of them that he had done something bad. This was not something that an ordinary person could do. He gave a thumbs up. Brother Fei, you have great 5 elements ability. That flying boat of yours flew well. It should have directly sent Blood River Sect's group to the mountain. This old man will make a friend of you. If you have time, come on Mount Laka. This old man will treat you well. Lu Xiaoyi observed their expressions and found that these people really did not know anything about the group of Qi Yuan. He was also puzzled. Then who was the one who secretly planned all this? Or was no one planning it? And they were also being used? So he smiled. Before coming to this place of exile, I heard that there are 2 very special orthodoxies here. Although they're unorthodox, they have a long history. I have always wanted to see them, but unfortunately, I have no chance to see their true faces. I will definitely disturb you. I'm a person who loves learning. I want to see all unfamiliar orthodoxies one by one. When the time comes, I hope everyone will not find me troublesome. He bid farewell to everyone one by one, leaving a promise to meet later, before everyone reluctantly left. These Jindan still had their own disciples and subordinates at the Dragon Boat Conference. They needed to be taken care of, but none of them were all alone like Lu Xiaoyi. Lu Xiaoyi flew around casually. Thinking about the truth of this Dragon God Conference, he found that some things were getting more and more interesting. There must be something that he had overlooked, right? In his close to 300 years of contact with the path of Qi of Fate, he had first come into contact with humans who carried Qi of Fate, then the realm's spirit vigor that carried Qi of Fate, and then he discovered that plants and animals could also carry Qi of Fate. Therefore, when the prairie people's sacrifices could pass down Qi of Fate, he subconsciously wondered if these inexplicable so-called God totems could also carry Qi of Fate and transmit it through the power of faith of humans. The prairie people's Qi of Fate was passed down through the gathering of a large number of mortals, and the dragon god's chi of fate was similarly passed down through the gathering of a large number of mortals. In that case, was the transmission of chi of fate through the medium of faith? Was it that every god revered by humans would be blessed by chi of fate? Or was it just a part of it? Or could it be understood the other way around, that gods existed because they had faith, and that faith was what truly attracted chi of fate? Why did these things always happen around him? Was it targeted at him? Or was it the sect he belonged to? Or the realm? If he were to one day go to a completely foreign realm that had nothing to do with the blue sky realm and the five rings, would these inexplicable things still happen? Could there be a certain person or a certain force that had mastered this method of transmitting chi of fate? Was all of this intentional? His head was about to explode from thinking about it. Chapter 662. Lu Xiaoyi casually wandered around and found a random mountain to cultivate on. He needed a period of peace and quiet. He was a conspiracy theorist. The memories from his previous life and his family background made it difficult for him to use simple and hot-blooded thinking to consider the series of problems he encountered in his cultivation. In the blue sky main world, it was difficult for him to start his own exploration because of the complicated relationships between various forces. But in the land of exile, in the backyard of Xinyuan, he didn't have to think too much. This was why he deliberately made friends with a few heterodox cultivators. They were all old foxes. When he extended an olive branch, those Jean Dan people would accept it. They also needed a friend with a sword vein, which was very good for their survival environment. Under the appearance of heroism, there was actually a calculation of benefits. It sounded very snobbish, but after experiencing Qin Erong's death, Lu Xiaoyi understood a truth. Taking the initiative to show goodwill didn't mean there was a conspiracy. Even if it was snobbish at the beginning, it was possible to become friends in the end. At his current level, if he still wanted to be pure in his communication, he would never have any friends. Life and death friends were friends, and friends with benefits were also friends. Under certain circumstances, they could actually be interchangeable. The sword tray continued to work. Instead of 2 hours a day, it became 4 hours a day. He had a sense of urgency, just like when he first climbed up the dome. Good days were always short-lived. Ever since he formed his gold core and relaxed for several decades, the crisis had found him again. It was still vague and mysterious, but he had a feeling that when he reached the nascent soul realm one day, it might be the time to unveil this big curtain. Before that, he had to have the ability to use his sword against opponents of any level. The Nanjiren didn't understand him and didn't know where his sense of crisis was, so he advised him in every way possible. But he himself knew what was going on. Other than the sword plate, he focused his swordsmanship on the sword formation, switching back and forth between the Big Dipper sword formation and the five-element sword formation, connecting them perfectly. He sought different combinations of scattered attacks and the sword formation to suppress the enemy, and how to maintain the power of the sword formation while fully displaying the technical characteristics of a single flying sword. For example, the darkness of the hidden fragrance, the thunder of the navy, the spirit of the tiger god, the mystery of the luck cutter. He could not give up the characteristics of a single sword just because he had a sword formation. That would be neglecting the essentials and focusing on the trifles. He could not look down on a sword formation just because he had the characteristics of a single sword. That would be rejecting the system. It had to be integrated, balanced, and turn the sword formation into a kind of structure, a framework. While maintaining the overall pressure, it could fully display the specialty of the single sword. Until the single sword was also a sword formation, and the sword formation was also a single sword. All of this required diligent practice and countless deductions in one's mind, so that the sword formation and the single sword would not be tied to each other, but would instead expand each other. Lu Xiaoyi's swordsmanship cultivation, after the single sword in the foundation establishment stage, developed to the sword formation system before and after the core formation stage. Now he was starting to fuse the two. This was also what every sword cultivator with ambition was doing. They were constantly changing, adapting to their own realm, and constantly improving themselves. They would break things up and work together, and then break things up again when they were done. This was how sword techniques gradually improved while constantly breaking the old framework. He did not learn any new swordsmanship, but only dabbled in it, especially in the five elements escape. This was the first thing he comprehended in the Jindan realm that was close to the Dao realm. There was no reason for him not to deepen and strengthen this aspect. His current cultivation was still shallow, but when he reached the middle stage of the Jindan realm, he would consider whether his second main cultivation method would be the five elements great shift. In his free time, he would go to the Yellow Rock Canyon in Central Continent. That was the lair of the Blood River sect, or Jiashan, where many Gu cultivators gathered. To him, these two orthodoxies were very unfamiliar and interesting. The Yellow Rock Canyon was a lava canyon that was over 5,000 miles long and hundreds of feet deep. It was a strange terrain formed when the Earth's crust was compressed and cracked when the land of exile was first formed. It was like a giant snake that stretched across the northern part of the land of exile. The canyon was thousands of miles long and was filled with thousands of caves of different depths. Other than the Blood River sect cultivators, there were billions of blood bats that were the other owners of this place. The Blood River was like a blood-colored rainbow in the canyon. Countless blood bats flew in the rainbow, increasing the majesty of the Blood River. A figure jumped up and down in the Blood River, flying swords shuttling back and forth. It was as if he was flying by air, but not a single blood bat was killed. Not long after, a figure jumped out and laughed loudly. "Give me some more time. I will definitely find traces of a blood rat like you." The Blood River retracted and Taoist Chang Shui appeared. Where would you find the time? Every time you enter and exit the Blood River, it is a new beginning. Do you think I'll do the same the next time, just because I found my tracks this time? The two came to a balcony outside a huge cave in the canyon. There were all kinds of delicacies there. After sitting down, Lu Xiaoyi took a bite of honey peach. "This is not bad. You didn't feed it with corpses, right?" Taoist Chang Shui shouted. "Blood River sect uses blood as its foundation, but we don't drink human blood. We sacrifice our own. Don't use your Xianyuan sword sect's way of doing things to measure Blood River sect. If we really talk about the ranking of ancient demonic sects, your sword vein is far above my Blood River sect." The two were already very familiar with each other. Their personalities were quite congenial, and it was also the result of their mutual efforts. Their original intentions were not pure. Lu Xiaoyi wanted to know some secrets of the land of exile, while Chang Shui wanted to form a good relationship with Blood River sect. They both had their own ulterior motives. But even if they had their own ulterior motives, they could still find each other's shining points in their interactions, as long as you were willing to look for them. In the process of making friends, some people would only see the unbearable side of the other party and nitpick on them. The result could be imagined. Some people were the opposite. They only saw the common points between themselves and the other, and were indifferent to differences, which often made it easier for them to become friends. Many cultivators used similar ideals as the first factor in making friends, which often solidified their circle and made them more and more intolerant of others. This was the reason why cultivators were alone. In fact, even people with different ideals could become friends, as long as you respected the other's ideals. Lu Xiaoyi did this, so he was accepted by the extreme Blood River sect cultivators. They could even experience the difference in the Blood River that they relied on for their lives. That dragon god talisman, what is it? It looks so real, as if the dragon god's blessing really came down. Chang Shui pointed at him. "You are too curious, even interested in something that has been passed down for tens of thousands of years in the land of exile. Did Xianyuan discover something? If you don't tell me clearly, don't blame me for being secretive." Chang Shui was very sharp. He was not afraid of the Xianyuan swordsman's motives. He was afraid that they had motives, but he did not know them. But what surprised him was that this swordsman was actually interested in the most common dragon god festival. This made him even more curious. Chapter 663. P.S. Guaranteed monthly votes. Lu Xiaoyi was very sincere. "It's not that Xianyuan discovered anything, but I'm a little confused. This originates from a special mystery. Unfortunately, you don't have it, so you can't feel it. This has nothing to do with Xianyuan or Blood River Sect. It might have a profound impact on the universe's cultivation world, or it might just be my groundless fears. No one knows. Other than me, that includes my sect. So I can't tell you the truth now. What I can promise you is that if I can tell you one day, I won't hide it from you. Daoist Qi Shui sneered and said, Please, you and I are just Jin Dan, not true monarch or half immortal, and have a profound impact on the universe. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? What mystery? I don't care. My Blood River Great Tao is the greatest mystery in the universe. Seeing swordsman staring at him with a smile, he said reluctantly, Remember what you said today. I'm also a curious person. If I can change the universe's cultivation world, I don't mind adding fuel to the fire. This Fu Zhao has a long history. How long ago? I don't know. Anyway, it has already surpassed the records in the sect. This is an extremely obscure passage. It's more like a combination of meaningless words. Even the ancestors of Blood River Sect had never truly understood the meaning of this. So our conclusion is that this is probably the sacrificial words left behind by the barbarians before the land of exile had its own cultivation world. They purposely used difficulty to confuse people's thoughts, to achieve a mysterious goal. Lu Xiaoyi said mockingly, So your Blood River Sect has been fooling everyone for tens of thousands of years? You don't know anything? You call your sect mysterious, but I think you're just ignorant and incompetent. Daoist Qi Shui was of course not convinced. Don't slander me. It's not like my Blood River Sect doesn't understand. The Gu Dao doesn't understand either. Heaven-defying sect calls itself a famous sect, but it's also sloppy. Everyone is just imitating and fooling around. Lu Xiaoyi asked, In a land of exile, other than the heaven-defying sect, the Blood River Sect, and the Gu Dao, is there no other sect that uses the talisman to worship the dragon god? Are the Fu Zhao of your three families exactly the same, or are there differences? Daoist Qi Shui was very certain. There should be differences. This is the rumor of the previous generation of Blood River Sect cultivators. They probably have seen the talismans of the other two sections. However, I have never seen it before, so I have no interest in it at all. If you didn't ask, I wouldn't even have thought about it. Which cultivator would be interested in a talisman used to entertain ordinary mortals? In a land of exile, only the three of us have such a thing. Every Dragon God festival is held in such a manner, and we take turns to host it. It's more of a habit than anything else. What do you want to know? Lu Xiaoyi was also worried. To be honest, I don't know either. I mean, that blessing of the Dragon God. Have you never paid attention to whether it really exists? Daoist Qi Shui was very sharp. You mean you can feel something? Lu Xiaoyi was very cautious. It's vague. If I could really feel something, I wouldn't have come to ask you. You know, it's just a guess. In a Dragon Boat conference, the most common winners are the three of you. Basically, you're there every time. So if the Dragon God really has a blessing, the three of you will also receive the most blessings. Daoist Qi Shui understood a little. That includes you swordsmen. However, the success rate of the swordsman descendants in the land of exile is not high, and not many of them can go to the main world. Are there more benefits? Or are there more disadvantages? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. I'm not sure about this. That's why I came to ask you. But the benefits and disadvantages are not important. My sword vein cultivates by myself, and I don't want to be disturbed by external forces. Daoist Qi Shui nodded. Exactly. On this point, Xianyuan and my Blood River Sect are very similar. These words were a little exaggerated. At the very least, the Blood River Sect in the land of exile could not be compared to Xianyuan. However, there was one thing that Daoist Qi Shui was right. The Blood River Sect was one of the most stubborn among all the heterodox forces. This could also be seen from their situation in the land of exile for tens of thousands of years. When I was young, I also participated in the Dragon Boat race. That was 500 years ago. But personally, I don't think the so-called Dragon God's blessing means anything to me. Theoretically speaking, if there is such a thing and it can't appear in my current level, is there a need for it to exist? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. There were too few clues, and he could not connect the dots at all. He was also very curious. Why were there so many sorcerers in the blue sky prairie who had luck? Why were there so few Jean Dan in the land of exile? What did this mean? Perhaps he felt that he had given too few answers and felt a little guilty. So Taoist Qi Shui took the initiative to say, I can give you a copy of the Fu Zhao. It's not a big deal. As for the Fu Zhao of the heaven-defying sect and the Gu Dao, I believe it can be easily obtained. It's not a secret skill, so who would treat it as a treasure? After leaving the Yellow Rock Canyon, Lu Xiaoyi found himself a little anxious. The secrets of the cultivation world could not be understood quickly and thoroughly as the goal. He had to fully consider the role of time in these secrets. If this was his destiny, even if he did not deliberately pursue it, the clues would automatically be exposed to him. If this was not his destiny, then what was there to pay attention to? He would just have to deal with whatever came his way. This annoying problem of luck had not helped him much in his 300 years of cultivation, but it had caused him a lot of trouble. He could not get rid of it, but he could not use it well. It was really troublesome, and it made him feel a little unbalanced. He remembered that when he was in Spear Point Town, his mentality was very good. He hid from everything, and in the end, he still solved the problem while hiding. Now, he could not return to that state, because he had more responsibilities and more obligations. Lu Xiaoyi felt that he should be able to relax a little. He still had 4 appointments with Water Deity, so there was no reason for him to break it, right? He never owed anyone a favor, and of course, he did not want others to owe him a promise. As a cultivator, he should not be calculative, but there were some things that if he did not care about, others would treat you as a fool. But before he could ask for the debt, a sword letter found him. With a sweep of his divine sense, he had a rough understanding of it. Jima Peninsula, something happened. The Surging Waves Pavilion's property in Jima Peninsula was given to the Sea Clan of the South Sea by him, who had just arrived. In the past 20 years, the Sea Beast clan had been operating here carefully, as if they were treading on thin ice. They were very sensible, which was unusual. They did not seek to expand, nor did they want to make a big impact. To be honest, they could not expand the influence of the Sea Beast clan in human territory. It was not only a problem of orthodoxy, but also a problem of the difference in the nature of the clan. Therefore, they only treated Jima Peninsula as a business area, opening the door widely and not rejecting guests from all over the place. The other 3 orthodoxies that competed with them did not make things difficult for them because of Lu Xiaoyi's shock. But in the past few years, something happened in the South Sea, and the sea beasts could no longer sit still. Chapter 664. Lu Xiaoyi could only put down his cultivation in exile and return directly. Spiritual Master Nan's judgment of the situation was very accurate. He would not summon him easily, but if he did, it must be because someone else was unable to complete the task. What happened? Why is it burning? It's been a few years. I think we can take Li Peinan out for a walk. We can't always keep him like this. His sword plate is very good. Lu Xiaoyi complained habitually. Spiritual Master Nan was already used to it and ignored him. He can't do it. Just that one sword plate, after using it, he would become a cripple. Swordsman theory and basic skills still have a lot to improve. Moreover, he's not the victim, so it's useless for him to go. Lu Xiaoyi was very surprised. What happened? Is it related to me? Spiritual Master Nan made a long story short. 4 years ago, the antlered centipede of the Southern Sea Beast clan was killed by a human. 1 year later, on the same day, another Jean Dan Sea Beast was killed in its nest. 3 years later, the same tragedy happened again. A Yuan beast of the Southern Sea Beast clan found this person a few months ago. After a fierce battle, it was defeated and died. According to the report of the Sea Beast at the scene, it was a Jean Dan Taoist who should be from the 3 pure ones. What's interesting is that every time he killed a Jean Dan Sea Beast, it was on the 5th of March, which was the day you fixed your sword on Jima Peninsula. Tell me, does this have anything to do with you? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Is he deliberately provoking Xian Yuan? Spiritual Master Nan corrected him. He's provoking you. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Martial uncle, do you have to use such a clumsy method to provoke me? Are you questioning Xuanyuan's decision on Jima Peninsula? What's the sect thinking? I feel that if I just get rid of this person, it won't show the dominance of Xianyuan as the master of the northern region. Before dealing with this person, I should first deal with the notification temple. Doesn't he want to stand up for the notification temple? He should be given a result to let him know the consequences of offending the northern region. You're not still collecting evidence, right? Reverend Nan harumphed. What evidence? Why, Xianyuan, do things. I never look at so-called evidence. Just a month ago, your martial Uncle Chung brought people to seal up the Record Keeper Temple. All cultivators were given a time limit to leave. Those who didn't leave had to accept the jurisdiction of my Mount E. Those Taoists might already be in the South Luo state right now. The three pure ones were not stupid either. They knew that after they stood out like this, the Chronicle Temple could no longer develop normally in the northern region. But they left happily. They do everything according to the rules, so it's not good for us to kill them. However, the person in the South Sea needs to be dealt with equally. So, other than you, there's no other choice. Coming here alone and slaughtering the South Sea, you're very confident. And there's also a Yuanying sea beast. Are the three pure ones declaring their strength to us? Lu Xiaoyi was a little surprised, because this was a swordsman's way of doing things. Now that it was being used by a spell cultivator, it felt strange. Reverend Nan, on the other hand, was very serious. We've used our chess pieces in the South region and roughly figured out the origin of this spell cultivator. His name is Qing Xian. Like you, he's also from the Fifth Ring. Looking at the time, he knows that Xianyuan, was transferred back from the Fifth Ring to become an elite. Needless to say, he's definitely a well-known figure among the Fifth Ring Jindan. He even knows that he has the strength to deal with you. But you can't let your guard down. Have you heard of this person in the Fifth Ring? Lu Xiaoyi spread his hands. I don't know. Disciple had just formed his gold core, and before I could familiarize myself with the Jindan in the Fifth Ring, I was kicked to Chinkong. So, like you, I don't know anything. Reverend Nan sighed. He knew it would be like this. The South Sea Beast clan is a weak clan. It's not difficult to kill the Jindan, but if you can kill the Yuanying Sea Beast, that's a different matter. You have to investigate. Understood. The Blue Sky Sea clan was not a whole. In terms of area, almost 70% of the Blue Sky region was ocean. They were separated by the 7 great continents and didn't have much contact with each other. There were countless sea clans, but they were basically based on the continents they were close to. Humans were more used to distinguish the sea clans by the deep sea clans and the shallow sea clans. The deep sea clans were the core of the sea clans. They didn't easily get close to the human continents. They formed their own system and had nothing to do with humans. Among them, there were many big demons and Yuanying beasts. There were also some at the level of Supreme. The shallow sea clans, as the name suggested, were the sea clans that were close to the continental shelf of the human continents. They had some form of contact with humans and would even trade with each other to a certain extent. They used the treasures in the sea to exchange for some items that they couldn't. However, their strength was relatively weak. The deep sea gave birth to the Jiao dragon, while the shallow sea gave birth to the turtles and shrimps. Most of the powerful sea beasts were only at the level of Jindan. For example, Lu Xiaoyi saw the Lustwater Lord at the Jima Peninsula. Yuanying beasts were extremely rare. Occasionally, there would be a few, but most of them would hide in the deep sea, because that was where the big demons lived. Under such circumstances, it was not impossible for an elite human cultivator to establish his power in the sea. It was impossible for the same person to go to the deep sea. Even so, this 3 pure ones cultivator named Qing Xian was very powerful. He was able to kill one of the 3 Jindan beasts that Xianyuan had made an agreement with. He was also able to kill the beasts at the same time on the 5th day of the 3rd month to establish his power. This showed that this person's control was very strong. He wasn't killing indiscriminately. This was a classic example of drawing a line. Xianyuan didn't have to worry that he wouldn't accept it. Where are you going? What do you need to prepare? Jinren Nan asked. He wasn't too worried. Qing Xian could kill the Yuanying beasts. Xiaoyi on his side could also kill the Yuanying beasts. In terms of battle records, they weren't weak at all. At their level, it was easy to determine victory and defeat, but difficult to determine life and death. They were all elites from the fifth ring. Needless to say, they didn't need anyone to remind them of their battle experience. I'm leaving now. What's there to prepare? Why don't you give me a few pots of your good wine? I'm used to drinking your wine. If I drink anything else, it won't taste good anymore. Jinren Nan reluctantly took out a few pots of wine. There's one thing I need to remind you. These South Sea demonic beasts aren't good people either. On the Jima Peninsula, they seem to be doing business honestly on the surface. But occasionally, they would eat humans. The worst ones were the 3 that were killed. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Oh, you're a person with perfect morals? Aren't you afraid that telling me this will mess up my state of mind and make me lose my killing intent? Jinren Nan snorted. In your past experience, I don't see you ever letting go because of your opponent's morals. They're all about face. Who doesn't know each other? In addition, after this matter is settled, tell the South Sea tribe that the tribute will be increased by 20%. This is the price for opening their mouths. This was also a rule in the cultivation world. If the ability wasn't enough, the tribute would be made up. There was no such thing as pity. Chapter 665. The vast South Sea was turbulent. It was hurricane season, and even the usually calm South Sea had lost its usual warmth, revealing the true nature of the ocean. On a reef, a Taoist sat cross-legged, allowing the wind and waves to hit him. However, it was as if he was a reef, soldered to the reef, not moving at all. He had been in Green Sky Sect for 4 years and had never been dissatisfied. He had always wanted to go back to the sect's birthplace, but he didn't expect to return for such a reason. He felt that the sect was making a mountain out of a molehill. Even if a swordsman who had just formed his gold core had succeeded in stabbing his sword into the fifth ring, what did that mean to someone of Jean Dan's level? It didn't mean anything. Jean Dan and Foundation Establishment were 2 different concepts. Although cultivation was also very important to a cultivator in the Foundation Establishment stage, there was a limit to the amount of dermic power a Foundation Establishment cultivator could hold. Therefore, some explosive Tao teachings and special methods could often achieve miraculous results. However, Jean Dan was different. The difference in dermic power between a peak late-stage Jean Dan cultivator and an early-stage Jean Dan cultivator could be dozens of times. This also meant that it could form a terrifying dermic pressure, continuous instant spells without any regard for cost. He had also heard the personal experiences of his senior and junior brothers who had fought with this sword cultivator. No matter how many times they said it, he felt that this was a stagnant mindset and a regression of courage. He couldn't be too direct in front of Gentle Breeze and the others, so he could only use his actions to show them what a true dermic cultivator was. Times had changed, and battles between dermic cultivators were no longer a battle of attrition. This concept was very popular in the fifth ring, but in Green Sky, everything was still slow and needed stimulation. He was one of the top fifth ring Jean Dan cultivators, but he was specially sent back to deal with a newly formed Jean Dan cultivator who had formed his gold core less than 100 years ago. This made him unhappy, even if Green Sky was a place he had always wanted to come back and experience. He was very clear about the sect's purpose in making such arrangements. For tens of thousands of years, the dermic lineage had been on guard against the elites of the sword vein. They spared no effort in surrounding and intercepting them, other than the fact that he didn't dare to use an upper realm cultivator to do it himself. He would never let go of any other opportunity, since this cigarette, but was able to stab a sword into the fish's leap, and was able to dominate the internal and external sword during the Foundation Establishment stage. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was a genius among geniuses. Even if he was just an outer sword, and his future prospects were far inferior to the inner sword, and his future potential was hard to predict, this still did not stop the Law Branch from being vigilant from the bottom of their hearts. Thus, The three pure ones had to use the most orthodox method and send the strongest cultivator allowed by the rules. This was the inevitable choice of the three pure ones. He, who was ranked third on the Gene Dan rankings, was fortunate enough to receive this mission. His goal was very clear: defeat him fair and square and kill him. This was the reason why he was here. He didn't try to hide it at all and placed everything on the table, killing one beast a year on the special day of the 5th day of the 3rd month. His purpose was not hard to guess. The first time he killed a beast, he might not be able to attract the attention of Mount E, but after the 2nd or 3rd time, he would spread the message without any words. This kind of message would be clear and unmistakable. Not to mention Xianyuan. Even those small and medium-sized schools in the northern region would be able to make the correct judgment. This kind of provocation could be tolerated by small forces, but Xianyuan could not. In the tens of thousands of years of the Sword Veins' history, there had never been a swordsman who could endure such provocation. It was Lu Xiaoyi who handled the South Sea matter. Since it had started, there must be an end. This was the conclusion he came to after careful consideration. When the law branch retaliated against the Sword Vein, the most difficult thing to do was to not be able to catch the culprit, let alone the war between cultivators. The Sword Vein's habit was to suddenly run out after a period of hibernation and stab the culprit a few times before disappearing without a trace. To put it nicely, it was called the traceless sword. Therefore, it was actually very difficult for him to find a swordsman's traces in the blue sky realm. Only the Jinma Peninsula at that time was left behind by the swordsman, which was also the most important tale left behind. Whether the swordsman would come or not, he did not consider this question. If the swordsman did not come, he would kill one beast a year in the South Sea for fun. He wanted to see how Mount E would swallow this anger. Attract a great demon? That was just a coincidence. After killing a nascent soul a few months ago, the sect behind him had already started to pressure the sea race in the deep sea. Moreover, he did not mind these kings of the sea race as long as they did not attack him together. If they came one after another, it would be a form of training for him. The entire plan was open and above board. For this reason, the three pure ones even willingly gave up the Chronicle Temple, the largest and most important stronghold in the northern region. In fact, they had no choice but to do so. If something really happened to Lu Xiaoyi, the Chronicle Temple would not be able to escape. His current position was about 2,000 miles away from the Jinma Peninsula coastline. It was just outside the boundary of the territorial sea, but it was still within the boundary of the shallow sea. The South Sea of the northern region was a little special. The seabed was gentle, and there was a full 3,000 miles of seabed outside the continental shelf. This kind of terrain was just right for him to use as the swordsman's battlefield. To be able to be ranked third in the 5-ring Gene Dan, Qing Xian naturally had his own strengths. Even if he did not really take his opponent seriously, he was still meticulous and considered every detail to the extreme. Of course, the only thing he did not consider when choosing the location of the battle was whether it would be beneficial to him. This was his pride and also where his Tao heart lay. His strength would not change because of the change of environment, whether it was the sea, the mountains, or the desert, in the sky above his head. Even if the hurricane was in full swing, there was still a clear and turbid chi. It pierced through the clouds. This was the most famous of the three pure orthodoxies, the two signs of purity and turbidity. It was thousands of feet high and could be seen from afar. This was the vision of his natal cultivation technique. In fact, it was also a guide. The meaning was very clear. I am here, waiting for you to come and fight me. In the 4 years since he came to Qing Kong, he had always been in such a state. With an unimaginable concentration, he was at sea and enjoyed himself. The cultivation of his state of mind had already reached a certain level. Today was the 5th day of the 3rd month. If no one came, he would randomly find a Gene Dan sea beast in the shallow sea and kill it to show his attitude. As he waited, he suddenly stopped when he was about to turn around and search for the sea beasts. The thousands of feet high chi of purity and turbidity was like a giant radar. Although it was very obvious, it could clearly detect the changes of qi within 1,000 miles. Just like how his qi of purity and turbidity was eye-catching, a sword gleam swept across the sky without any concealment. Qing Xian let out a long breath. His old rival for tens of thousands of years was finally here. Although he did not hate the sea, to a cultivator who had been cultivating in the Celestial Mountains for 4 years, smelling the fishy smell of seafood was still not a pleasant process. His mind shook and the qi of purity and turbidity became even more vigorous. Vaguely, the hurricane coincidentally appeared around him and seemed to be focusing on where he was standing. It also allowed his senses to expand to every corner that the hurricane swept past. Under such senses, every move of the swordsman was vividly displayed in his mind, down to the smallest detail. This was control. The perfect use of the environment. It was not control for the sake of control, but control for the sake of killing. It was control for the sake of offense, control for the initiative. It was control based on the confidence of his cultivation base. Chapter 666. According to Qing Xian's understanding, being in the middle of the hurricane was equivalent to being in his control. Although he could not completely control the hurricane, that was the ability of a Yuanying stage Taoist master, but he could affect the hurricane to a certain extent. Under the situation where he did not change the direction of the wind, he could use the force of the hurricane. At the very least, he could affect the escape of the sword cultivator. Clear and turbid could also be understood as yin and yang. This was the Tao realm he dabbled in after entering the Jin Dan. The Tao realm was the specialty of the Yuanying spiritual masters, but in the current cultivation world, if one wanted to make a name for himself in the Jin Dan realm, he must have something he was good at. It was also because of his deep understanding of the Tao realm of yin and yang that he was able to achieve his current status in the 5 Rings Jin Dan. The hurricane did indeed affect the swordsman's escape. His route was no longer a straight line, but instead he was drifting along with the hurricane like a fallen leaf in the autumn wind. It was as if he could not control his body. However, Qing Xian suddenly realized that his opponent's speed was not affected at all. He could control the hurricane to a certain extent, but his opponent was like a wind spirit, changing directions in his most familiar domain. The power of the 5 elements. Qing Xian's lips curled into a smile. Very good. This kind of battle would not be boring. He liked opponents who were tough, so that he could unleash his talents to the fullest. Only the weak would like to be crushed, while the strong would only want to be evenly matched. He formed the wind mudra with his hands and estimated the distance. A gust of wind appeared at a certain spot in the hurricane. The technique was instantaneous, but the wind was not instantaneous. This was the biggest characteristic of the wind elemental technique. It required a period of time to accumulate power in order to achieve a large area of effect and great power. It was also a technique that was closely related to nature. A good wind elemental cultivator was able to predict the opponent's trajectory perfectly, and when the wind was at its strongest, he would be able to catch up with the opponent. He had long heard that the swordsman was famous for his long range and heavy attacks. He did not know how heavy his heavy attacks were, but in terms of long range, he had already broken the legend of the swordsman. Firstly, his cultivation was several times stronger than his opponent, and secondly, he was able to take advantage of the hurricane. This was also a form of psychological warfare. It was to strike at the opponent's strongest point. The current peak 5-ring Jin Dan Dharma cultivators were no longer as conservative as their predecessors from 10,000 years ago. They were starting to resemble swordsmen in many aspects, especially in terms of combat. In extreme cases, spell warriors would appear, just like the swordsmen. They would use their 3 axes, their most powerful skills, at the beginning of the battle. Qing Xian wasn't that extreme, but he was even more frightening. He was very clear on when he should become a tempering spell cultivator, and when he should become an instant spell warrior. The calculation was perfect. Just as the figure was about to appear 10 miles away, the tornado and the wind had already accumulated its power to the extreme. In an instant, the area within a few miles of the figure was covered by this powerful tornado. This wasn't an ordinary tornado. Forming it to envelop the opponent was only the first step. The second step was to create hailstorms. Under his control, the tornado would form countless hailstones the size of a person's head. One hailstone was naturally insignificant to a cultivator, but when tens of thousands of hailstones came crashing down like raindrops, they would wreak havoc within the tornado at a terrifying speed. The density of the hailstones was something that flying swords couldn't completely defend against. The third step was to cause the tornado to collapse. All of the energy would collapse inwards. This involved a hint of the Tao of space, but Qing Xian only knew how, not why. He could probably only shrink the tornado to a diameter of a few feet, but not to the extent that he could do it like some Yuanying perfected monarchs who were proficient in space, shrinking the tornado to the size of a mustard seed. But to Jin Dan, this could still be considered a forbidden technique that wasn't a forbidden technique. It was an extremely complex technique. First wind, then feng shui, then feng shui, then feng shui in space. The moment he made his move, Qing Xian used the forbidden technique that he was most proficient in. He wanted to use this to make a judgment. Should he choose the instantaneous technique in the battle against the swordsman? Or should he choose the most mediocre way to hone his cultivation? If the swordsman was trapped in the tornado, he would not hesitate to use the instantaneous technique, regardless of the cost. If the opponent easily escaped, he would have to consider if it was worth it to use the instantaneous technique excessively, considering the opponent's ability to deal with spells. But the swordsman chose the third path. It was as if he already knew that there was a trap waiting for him. With a mysterious acceleration, which was probably similar to the instantaneous short-distance movement of the heavenly sword ruler, he perfectly avoided the tornado. As soon as he appeared, several flying swords were already shot out one after another. It was a close combat. Qing Xian was alarmed. He was alarmed because if the heavenly sword ruler could be used, there must be flying swords in front of him. With his perception in the tornado, it was impossible for the opponent to not sense the swords in the process. There was only one conclusion. The swordsman had already released his flying swords before he got close to the tornado. His movement was a combination of the flying swords and the cultivator's body, which was why there was no leakage of spiritual energy when the flying swords were released. This was a cunning opponent, or rather, an opponent with an unusually rich amount of combat experience. Qing Xian's interest was finally piqued. His desire for battle was unleashed. However, he didn't start to waste time like the traditional Dharma cultivators. Instead, he chanted softly and pointed his finger. Without a single spiritual artifact appearing, countless ice cones, wind blades, fire snakes, water arrows, wooden spikes, and golden spears all mixed together to form a torrent of spells that surged towards him. At the same time, he was stepping on yin and yang, stepping on Yu's gang. His entire body was moving around in a small space, but every step he took was an alternating transformation of yin and yang. The clear and turbid qi formed from this, one yin and one yang, one clear and one turbid qi, alternating with each other, helped him block the lightning-fast flying sword. The sword were heavy. They were as heavy as the rumors said. They were heavier than he imagined. But his yin and yang were not mixed up, clear and turbid. His defense was one of the most advanced defensive techniques of the three clear ones. It was not the traditional way of blocking with brute force. Instead, it was a comprehensive defensive technique that combined his steps, yin and yang, clear and turbid qi into one. It was called the supreme yin-yang xiangang technique. To cultivate this technique, the requirements for the cultivator were very high. Firstly, the clear and turbid qi had to be controlled easily. Secondly, the yin and yang realm had to be at a higher level. Lastly, the cultivator's spiritual energy had to be at the peak of Jindan. Just this supreme yin-yang Xingang technique alone took him hundreds of years to cultivate successfully. It almost took up his entire Jin Dan cultivation, but the returns were also huge. This was because he no longer needed any defensive spiritual weapons, talismans, or spells. He could put all his energy into attacking. Just like now, he was only circling around in a narrow space, but the flying swords in the air could not cause any substantial damage to him. One virtual and one real, one yin and one yang, clear and turbid. Not only did it prevent his opponent's flying swords from exerting force, it also made it difficult for him to even position himself. Every change forced his opponent to reposition himself, and after repositioning himself, he crossed over to the next yin and yang. This endless cycle was a dead knot. Chapter 667. Lu Xiaoyi felt that it was very difficult for him. If his tactic was to control the sword in a large area, then this Taoist tactic was to control the sword in a small area. If this had happened to him when he first came to Qin Kong, he would have already lost. But now it was different. He had transformed 2 sword formations and had a deep understanding of the 5 elements. Most importantly, he had already touched upon the essence of controlling the sword, unrestrained and unrestrained. His 7 flying swords didn't have a fixed form at all. They were constantly changing and combining. A moment ago, it was still the 7-star sword formation, and the next moment, it could become the 5-element sword formation. Perhaps 6 flying swords would form a pressure, and 1 flying sword would attack. Perhaps 3 flying swords would form a sword net to intercept, and 4 flying swords would attack. There was never a fixed shape. Even the sword formation was often in an incomplete state. It could be completed at any time, but it was also chaotic. His figure also did not circle around Qin Xian. After attacking and defending a few times, he suddenly jumped up to Qingming. He could even find time to drink the wine given to him by Nanjunren. When strange fish swam by on the sea, he could even catch them to see clearly. The only question was whether or not to chase. This was the advantage of controlling the sword in a large area and letting go of the mind. This was also the rare sword heart that swordsmen often pursued but could not obtain. His cultivation was not enough. If it was not enough, he could leave. When he felt that a fierce attack was not effective and needed a breather, he could just jump away. He was trying to find a way to deal with Qin Xian's wonderful footwork. What was the most effective attack? How to judge where his next step came from? How to disrupt the balance of yin and yang? How to mix the clear and turbid qi? There was no technique without a weakness, as long as he had enough time. But while he appeared relaxed, the pressure was equally great. When an instantaneous spell warrior attacked with all his strength, the technique's pervasive characteristics were magnified to the extreme. Even Lu Xiaoyi's sword formation could not completely block it, unless he gave up on attacking. For the first time, he felt the terror of Jin Dan's peak spell warrior when he focused on the foundation of the technique. The power was simple and pure. What was terrifying was the casting time. Basically, there was no pause at all. It was purely the accumulation of basic skills. However, once this accumulation reached a certain scale, it was comparable to a never-ending, forbidden technique. Lu Xiaoyi did not have many opportunities to attack. Compared to Qin Xian, he only had a 4 to 6 chance of winning. This was one of the rare occasions in his Taoist cultivation where he was at a disadvantage in a one-on-one battle. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. Qin Xian realized that she might be in trouble. This was because his opponent didn't seem like the legendary swordsman with a sense of glory and a desire to win. Instead, he seemed like a scoundrel. He could no longer occupy the eye of the hurricane, because his opponent would fly out and drink a mouthful of wine while fighting. This meant that the swordsman didn't see this battle as a battle of honor between the 3 pure ones and Xian Yuan. There was no way he could exhaust the swordsman's mana. He was certain that the moment his mana ran out, the swordsman would run for his life. A clear signal was, "You can decide the space of the battle, and I can decide the time." To him, Using the supreme yin-yang xiangang for defense and basic spell attacks was his best offensive and defensive system. Of course, he had more complicated attack methods, but at the same time, it also meant that he would be in a dangerous situation. In this world, there was no such thing as a perfect balance between offense and defense. His current system was the closest to perfection. If he wanted to change it, he would have to pay a price. He also had a few ways to control his opponent, but the so-called control was relative. This was the balance of the heavenly axiom. Controlling his opponent required more energy than killing him. This also meant that he couldn't maintain a perfect defense while controlling his opponent at the same time. Lu Xiaoyi leaped and disappeared into the clouds. He borrowed the wind and thick clouds to block Qing Xian's spiritual perception. The next moment, he suddenly pounced. Qing Xian's technique was activated again, but who knew that this pounce was just a feint? It looked ferocious, but in reality, it was just a figurehead. He returned to the clouds again. This happened a few times. Whenever Qing Xian let his guard down, he wanted to confirm whether the swordsman's pounce was real, but the flying sword had already arrived. Qing Xian stepped on yin and yang, and the flying sword pierced through his clear and turbid qi. He didn't want to continue the battle. Wherever the flying sword passed, he disappeared without a trace, once again escaping from the spell's attack range. In terms of attack speed, even the fastest basic spell was not on the same level as the flying sword. Qing Xian was having a headache. His supreme yin-yang xiangang was good at interpreting yin and yang in a small space, but it wasn't suitable for chasing after enemies in a large area. When the swordsman used his sword to the extreme, unless he gave up his strongest defense, he wouldn't be able to keep up with the swordsman's rhythm. The battle turned into a battle where both sides sang their own tune and played their own trumpets. No one was willing to fight to the death in the opponent's field of expertise. This was the guidance of battle experience, and also the reality of abandoning the so-called face. When the swordsman was no longer hot-blooded, and when the spell cultivator gave up on the so-called tradition, the battle went in a strange direction. If the battle continued like this, there wouldn't be a result even if they fought for 10 years. But neither side would take the initiative to leave. That would mean taking the initiative to retreat. If Qing Xian left first, he wouldn't have the face to interfere in the dispute in the South Sea. If Lu Xiaoyi left, the rules he set in the South Sea would be gone. Therefore, he had to hold on. Qing Xian gave up on a few of his more common control methods. In his life, he spent most of his energy on the Tao of spells on the supreme yin-yang xiangang steps. His attack methods were simple basic spells to the extreme, and his dabbling in forbidden spells was limited. Since the swordsman was good at using his sword, he would definitely have many ways to escape. If he recklessly used control, he would be putting himself in danger. Because no one could use the supreme yin-yang xiangang steps, forcefully control the barrier, and unleash a powerful forbidden spell at the same time. There had to be a trade-off. He chose forceful control, but what would he give up on? Attack? What was the point of controlling the opponent? Give up the supreme yin-yang xiangang steps? What would he use to defend? The space was too big. He couldn't suppress his cultivation and turn it into a victory. There was a gap in his evasion techniques. He was strong in combining evasion and defense in a limited space, but weak in long-distance abrupt rises and falls. To him, the most practical thing now was to change the battle space and environment. The space and the vast sea were originally his choices, but because of the swordsman's shrewdness, they lost their meaning. But now, he could change the environment once more. This was also the best application of his clear and turbid qi. It was the realization he had gained over the years. He stealthily approached the surface of the sea, and at the same time, began to gather a waterspout on the surface of the sea. This was his preference when it came to spells, just like the dangerous tornado at the beginning of the battle. This hobby had been running through his life of cultivation. He even liked to eat all kinds of rolls: meat rolls, flour rolls, spring rolls. Rolls were powerful and had a wide range, but they needed time to gather. As expected, the swordsman understood and wasn't afraid of his waterspout. He could clearly tell that the waterspout was still a few breaths away from being a threat. The flying sword suddenly appeared, but the waterspout didn't change. This was an illusion. His real intention was to use his clear and turbid chi. Chapter 668. In the sky, Qing Xian's two chis of clear and turbid chis were attracted and released. The environment was inverted as well. The sea became the sky, and the sky became the sea. This was based on a mysterious space displacement. Jin Dan should not have such an ability, but the three chis of clear and turbid chis of clear and turbid chis under the infusion of a cultivator's great mana, and in a familiar environment, they could barely do it. Lu Xiaoyi was instantly pressed to the bottom of the sea. His original position was close to 10,000 feet in the air. With this reversal of environment, his position was based on the sea level, and he was pushed 10,000 feet below the sea level. Qing Xian was originally 2,000 feet above the sky, so naturally, it was pushed 2,000 feet below the sea level. Lu Xiaoyi's first reaction was not to walk toward the surface of the water. This was the most instinctive reaction of a normal person, but he did not. As a cultivator with a deep understanding of the five elements, his 100 years of hard work on the five elements had finally paid off. Therefore, he dug even deeper. At the same time, the sword spirits quickly shifted their swords to form the true five elements sword array. In the previous battle, his five-element sword formation showed that his Tao state was not enough, because the sword spirit was of the five elements, but the flying sword itself was still of the original material. This made Qing Xian not particularly concerned about his five elements ability. But now that it had entered the water, the sword spirit changed the sword body in the sword case, and it had become the real five elements sword formation. In particular, the water attribute flying sword was like a tiger that had grown wings in this environment. The underwater environment was beneficial to water-type spells, but it was a hindrance to sharp objects like flying swords. This was the main reason why the swordsman was dragged into the underwater environment. As for the swordsman's decision to dive into the water, it was in line with his unconventional nature. In fact, Qing Xian had already prepared a suitable water-type technique and was just waiting for him to float up. Since he did not float up, it was just to buy him some time. He relied on the fact that he could freely use the profound handle steps in the water. This made him, in a certain sense, invincible. Both of them had something to rely on. One was in a shallow layer, while the other was in the middle layer. They were looking for opportunities. But the accident came even more suddenly than their tit-for-tat. This was the territory of the sea beasts of the South Sea. In the past 4 years, 3 Jin Dan sea demons and 1 Yuanying patriarch had perished, causing the sea beasts of the South Sea to hate Qing Xian to the core. The 3 purities were able to stop the deep-sea sea tribe from lending a helping hand. They were able to warn the Yuanying sea creatures not to interfere, but they were unable to stop the South Ocean Jin Dan sea creatures from taking revenge. It was their right. It was true that they couldn't beat him, but they could monitor him at any time. This was the sea, their territory, and there were countless sea demons of all sizes that listened to their orders. The battle between Qing Xian and the swordsman had only just begun, but the news had already spread like wildfire under the water. Even though it looked like the turbulent waves were caused by the hurricane, in reality, there were already a large number of sea beasts gathering under the surface of the sea. They were either there to watch the battle or to take advantage of the situation to add insult to injury. They were there to see the final result and the progress of the battle. They didn't expect that the battle between the two parties would go from the air to the water. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the sea beasts who were born and raised in the sea. Comparatively speaking, the sea beasts' thinking was still a far cry from the scheming and astute humans. The huge losses they had suffered over the past few years made them choose to strike at the first opportunity. They didn't think about the consequences or the far-reaching consequences. Do you need to think so much when you kill my beast in my home? Of course, as an intelligent species, they didn't go into battle bare-chested. Instead, They chose a method that was more suitable for the current situation. The turbulence of the sea surface and the raging hurricane was the easiest way to create a unique phenomenon in the sea, especially under the instructions of the Jin-Dan sea beasts. A huge wave of sea beasts was forming nearby. Billions of schools of fishes, prawns, clawed beasts, jellyfish, aggressive sharks, and so on. The number was so huge that it was unimaginable. There were even chi refinement beasts, foundation-building spirits, and Jin-Dan beasts that had gained sentience. They were like a flood of seafood, rushing towards the place where the two of them were fighting. In the home ground of the sea beasts, even the powerful Qing Xian and Lu Xiaoyi couldn't contend with them in such an environment. Fighting against thousands of soldiers and horses alone? That was wishful thinking. No matter how exquisite their water escape technique was, or how profound their Xingang steps were, under the fearless onslaught of the school of fishes, any thoughts of resistance would be suicidal. Both of them were in a difficult situation. Qing Xian was in a difficult situation because he was the main target of the sea beasts. No matter how amazing his Xingang steps were, how could he avoid such a brutal onslaught? He didn't even dare to hurt a single one of them. Even if it was an ordinary fish. This was because the smell of blood would make the sea beasts even more irritable. Without sentience, it meant that they could only act on instinct. Under normal circumstances, their ancestors could still restrain them to a certain extent. However, under the bloodthirsty state, even the gods couldn't do anything about it. They would devour every foreign object they encountered along the way. The only good news for him was that he wasn't too far away from the surface of the sea. He was only 2,000 to 3,000 feet away from the surface of the sea. Lu Xiaoyi was also in a difficult situation. He was in a difficult situation because he was too deep in the water. At a depth of almost 10,000 feet, it was difficult for him to surface immediately. The sea beasts knew who was the enemy, but the sea beasts didn't. His advantage was that the pressure he could withstand was limited. The most ferocious fishes were all charging towards the unlucky Qing Xian. His flying sword, especially that water attribute flying sword, could be used for sneak attacks. However, under the condition that his opponent was still using his Xingang steps, it was hard to tell how far he could achieve it. Pride was deeply rooted in the heart of every swordsman. Injuring his opponent in such a situation would also cause a large number of sea beasts to die. He didn't want that to happen. He wasn't a soft-hearted person on the outside. Using the environment to his advantage when he was killing had never caused any psychological barrier. In fact, he often took the initiative to take advantage of the environment. However, it wasn't suitable for the current situation. He was a well-matched opponent. Even in some aspects, he was inferior to him. He needed this kind of training. He hoped that he could defeat him fair and square one day. Most importantly, as Qing Xian was trying his best to surface, he saw two things that he was extremely interested in. The first reason was that he was far from being able to discover the true profundity of the profound aura steps from his previous intermittent attacks. However, under the reckless attacks of the sea beasts, he was gradually able to see a lot of substantial things, allowing him to see the pattern and a glimmer of hope to break it. He didn't understand yin and yang, so he needed time. Those Taoists tried their best to hide their secrets during the battle, but now they had no choice but to reveal their secrets. This was much more meaningful than ambushing him now. The second thing was that Qing Xian used all his strength to reveal something in his mind. Lu Xiaoyi was extremely familiar with the fate. However, unlike him who used the sword spirit and the colors of nature to conceal it, the Taoist Qing Xian's method of concealing his fate was yin and yang, a domain that he was unfamiliar with. Chapter 669. When the two emerged from the sea, they were already dozens of miles away from each other. Their fighting spirit had faded. Qing Xian sighed and turned to fly into the depths of the sea. Lu Xiaoyi had no intention of chasing after him. But it was not over yet. The three Pure Ones had sent this guy from the distant Five Rings not to test his fighting power, but to kill him. He knew this very well. The three pure ones knew that as time passed, killing him would become more and more difficult. After his cultivation increased, it would no longer be a mission that could be completed openly. Hence, they had to do it as soon as possible. It was a sea beast. Loathsome water monarch cautiously approached. They had met once in the Ma Peninsula. Fellow Taoist Yin, will he come back? In the azure sky great world, the demonic beasts had always been at a disadvantage, especially the sea tribes in the shallow sea. Their problem was that they did not know who to rely on. Was it the deep sea tribes of the same origin? Or was it Xian Yuan, the overlord of the North region? He won't come back. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at it. He did not doubt that if they had made a mistake, the sea beast would not let him go after killing Qin Xian. Even though the sea beasts did not seem to be very smart, they still knew the basics of framing. This was the reason why there were still waves of beasts coming for him. The sea demons only wanted to see if they could keep Qin Xian here forever, and he was their second target. In the world of cultivation, there were countless obstacles. Just because Xian Yuan was the overlord of the North didn't mean that everyone would lick his boots. Behind his back, people would never stop. This was the unchanging rhythm of the world of cultivation. But if you South Sea demons do not control your behavior, Bai Xian will come after Qin Xian. Then, how will you speak? Of course, the Lakshui Lord knew what he was talking about. I told them not to listen. They're used to being wild, Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Rules are not for show. They need to be established. If you are willing to use this method to solve every problem, I don't mind. Maybe there are many demons in the South Sea, so it doesn't matter if you lose a few. In the future, your annual tribute will be increased by 30%. Is there a problem? Qin Xian flew all the way to Nanzhou. After this failure, the opponent was already mentally prepared. It would be difficult to find a similar opportunity again. Even if there was, it would be hard for him to imagine meeting this swordsman again. How could he kill him? It was not difficult to defeat him. The difference in cultivation was not something that could be resolved in a short period of time. The key was how to turn victory into killing intent. In the final stage of the Beast Tide, he had the opportunity to create chaos, and that was a massacre. He could drag himself and the swordsman into the rampaging Beast Tide. He had the profound aura steps, so in terms of danger, he wasn't more dangerous than the swordsman. However, the prerequisite for doing so was the death of countless sea beasts, mortal beasts and Foundation Establishment beasts, but he wasn't willing to do this. In the past 4 years, the 3 Jin Dan sea beasts that he had killed had all swallowed humans. He had the 3 Pure One's secret technique, so he could easily identify this. Even if they were the people of the northern region, they were still humans. He would never treat them differently. Whether it was the southern region or the northern region, humans were a race. P.S. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes. The elders in the sect commented that if he could get rid of the so-called moral insistence in his heart, he would be able to reach a higher level. However, although he seemed to agree on the surface, he didn't think so in his heart. He had his own insistence, and it was because of his insistence that he had everything he had now. Since he was walking on the right path, why should he listen to the so-called advice of others? He was who he was. There were countless lives in the Beast Tide, and he would only kill those that deserved to be killed. This was his principle. In his entire life, he had never killed a spirit that he shouldn't kill. Of course, the battle of orthodoxy was another matter. For people like him and the swordsman, since they had already stepped on the path of defying the heavens, it didn't matter if they deserved to die or not. If the heavens were fair, they deserved to die. There was also fate. Lu Xiaoyi discovered that he had fate when he was dealing with the Beast Tide with all his might, and it was already nearing the end of the battle. However, he discovered that Lu Xiaoyi had fate not long after the battle began. When Lu Xiaoyi's 7 sword spirits came out, he no longer needed to protect his fate. This magical ability didn't come from the secret teachings of the 3 Pure Ones, and the 3 Pure Ones didn't have anything similar to the ability to see each other's fate. He relied on a special opportunity that gave him the opportunity to fuse with a magical yin-yang eye stone. This was the reason why he could understand yin and yang in depth when he was still in Jindan. This was also the reason why he was good at things like wind tornadoes, water tornadoes, fire tornadoes, and earth tornadoes. This was the power of the yin-yang eye. It allowed him to easily control the yin and yang tai chi rotation. Unlike most cultivators who would lose control as soon as the tornadoes started to rotate. The yin-yang eye had its magical properties, but it couldn't directly see through people's minds, let alone their fate. However, there was one special thing about the yin-yang eye. Not only could it see people, but it could also see oneself. After hundreds of years of in-depth study and observation of this ball of providence in his mind, he had a unique understanding of the form of energy in the ball of providence through his yin-yang eyes. To achieve this, in addition to talent, he also needed a fortuitous encounter with his yin-yang eyes, and he also needed to have such a ball of providence. That was why he could see it, but other Jinren and perfected immortals who were also proficient in yin and yang might not be able to see it. This was because they didn't understand the form of energy in the ball of fate. This kind of yin-yang identification technique couldn't solve the obstruction of the sword spirits, but after the sword spirits left, it could decipher the colors of nature. The essence of nature was the 5 elements and yin and yang. Then, he discovered the form of energy that he was familiar with. Although it was still different from his, it was bigger and stronger, and he didn't know how many people's fate it had devoured to accumulate to its current level. But their essence was the same. As people with fate, there was no need to be so anxious to kill each other. Ever since Qing Xian built his foundation, he felt fate on his body and had devoured a few people's fate. However, he had never taken the initiative to attack with the reason of devouring fate. Basically, it was devoured passively, and it was challenged by others. Among these people, there were enemies, fellow cultivators, and even senior and junior brothers. This was the secret of their circle, and no one would reveal it in front of others. However, he belonged to the moderate faction in this circle. Because of the yin-yang eye, because he was the backbone of the sect, and because he had gone to many outer realms with the 3 Qing floating rafts, he had long suspected that the people with fate were distributed throughout the universe, and not just in the 5 rings. Therefore, he wasn't too keen on snatching fate. Things were clear. Even if he had the power to dominate one part of the universe, could he snatch the entire universe? What about the other parts of the universe? Before he figured out the truth, he was more inclined to be cautious and observe. Chapter 670. Returning to Nanluo Ningzhou, he headed straight to Longhuan Blessed Land. The 3 Pure Ones. This name in Taoism was the epitome of Taoism, but in this part of the universe, it had undergone many changes of separation and unification. In ancient times, in the Azure Sky Big World, there was a sect called Taishang Induction Sect. They cultivated the 3 Pure Ones, the purest form of Taoism. However, due to an internal change, Taishang Induction Sect was divided into 3, which resulted in Taiqing, Yuqing, and Shangqing. In fact, their ancestors were the same, and their inheritance was more or less the same, but each had its own emphasis. This was something that happened 50,000 years ago. Another thing was the Zhuozhou Galaxy's attack on the Sirius Galaxy 20,000 years ago, which was named the 5 Rings. As the orthodox Taoism, the 3 Pure Ones actively participated, and they also reaped enough benefit from the 5 Rings. However, the problem was that the 5 Rings was not the Azure Sky Big World, where there were many strong sections. Not to mention other things, just the giant Supreme Sect and the rising Xianyuan Sword Sect alone made the 3 Pure Ones feel heavy pressure. Therefore, in the 5 Rings, the 3 Pure Ones unified into one sect. They did not change back to Taishang Induction Sect, but unified under the name of 3 Pure Ones. However, what they found strange was that even though they appeared as the 3 Pure Ones on the 5 Rings, in their hometown, the Azure Sky Big World, the 3 Pure Ones were not unified. They still lived their own lives. Taiqing was in Nanluo Ningzhou, Yuqing was in Donghai Linzhou, and Shangqing was in Zygosa. Later on, the azure sky spiritual opportunity declined and was lost again. It became Shangqing was still in Shisha, while Taiqing and Yuqing were squeezed in Nanluo. Comparing the origins of the sects, Qing Xian actually came from the Shangqing branch of the Three Pure Ones. It was also one of the more solitary branches of the Three Pure Ones. Although this branch was not as good as Taiqing and Yuqing in terms of quantity and foundation, it had always been unique in terms of talent. When talking about the outstanding people of the Three Pure Ones, they could not get around the Shangqing branch. However, Qing Xian came back to carry out a mission, not to visit family and friends. Therefore, he still had to report to Longhuan Blessed Land, because it was an indisputable fact that Taiqing was the leader of the Three Pure Ones. No one stopped him along the way. He reached the Three Pristine Treasure Palace. He did not have any good friends here. After all, he had only been here for a short time. Most of the time, he had been trapped in the South Sea of the northern region. He did not have any opportunities. Even if he had the chance, he wouldn't think much of the cultivators here. This was the unique characteristic of the prime, clear lineage. They were more aloof and more pure, leaning towards the legacies of ancient Taoism. They didn't fit in with the current Taoism. There were conflicts everywhere. Even the hot-blooded sword vein had countless factions and groups, not to mention the three clear ones who were known for their scheming. The prime clear and jade clear ones had always been at odds with each other and had great internal strife. However, their relationship with the grand clear ones was still able to be maintained. If he looked down on others, others would naturally look down on him as well. As a matter of fact, when he returned this time, the Taoists who had received the news long ago gave him a meaningful look. The general idea was, "Aren't you very awesome?" Why was it that, after setting out, they still ended up returning empty-handed? He didn't care either. It wasn't worth it for a vulgar person. How could a sparrow know the aspiration of a bluebird? When he entered the Three Clear Treasured Palace, a few Taoists were chatting. There was even a perfected monarch among them. Qing Xian bowed to them one by one and stood at the side, listening quietly. They were probably talking about some methods to repair the Five Elements Mountain. This was a strange thing that he knew after he came here. The Five Elements Mountain, the famous mountain of the Taiqing sect, had its spirituality greatly damaged. It couldn't be repaired without thousands of years. In the end, they still didn't know who did it. It was really strange. After discussing for a while, the Taoists looked at him. Among them, Taoist Kusanagi, who was in charge of this matter, asked, "Qing Xian, you're back? Did you gain anything from this trip?" Qing Xian's expression was calm. He wasn't depressed because of the failure. I lured Xianyuan's cigarette, but to attack me at the southern sea of the north region. After a fierce battle, it's a pity that I couldn't succeed. This is my fault. I'll find another chance and come up with another plan. However, I can't guarantee that I'll succeed next time. Thank you for your understanding, Uncle Masters. Kusanagi laughed. They already knew about this news. Oh, why do you think so? Is it because that Xianyuan cigarette, but strength, isn't inferior to yours? I heard that this person formed his gold core less than 100 years ago, but you're an old gold core that's more than 300 years old. You're both five-ringed heroes. Why is this person so difficult to deal with? Qing Xian spoke the truth. My strength is above his. However, due to the limitations of the environment, I couldn't turn my advantage into a killing move. This person's sword movements are very graceful. It's very difficult to catch him. Moreover, he doesn't care about the so-called honor. The people here were all old, nascent souls who had interacted with Xianyuan for their entire lives. They knew what he meant. Humph. So you've comprehended Xuanyuan's wretched sword heart. Graceful. You really know how to speak good words for others. I heard that in the end, it was because of the intervention of the Southern Sea race that caused you to return empty-handed? A Taoist master asked. Qing Xian disagreed. It has nothing to do with the Southern Sea race. Their beast hide is the same to me and cigarette, but the effect is the same. Whether or not they cause trouble, it's very difficult for me to kill this person under normal circumstances. Kusanagi master looked at him. Then, are you planning to give up? Qing Xian didn't hesitate. This disciple came here to accept the order of the upper hall's joint meeting. I don't have the option of giving up. However, I wish to change the battle environment. Otherwise, it'll be very difficult for me to succeed. I need to make preparations. I seek the support of all the senior uncles here. Kusanagi master nodded. As long as you don't lose your mind and remain unfazed by honor and disgrace, there's still a chance. What I want you to know is that this cigarette butts harm to the three clear ones isn't limited to his potential. In fact, it's a very serious consequence. Thus, killing this person isn't without reason. There's a cause and effect. As Taoists, the old Taoists here all understood the prime, clear lineage's bad habit of thinking highly of themselves. They were afraid that he would have some so-called moral thoughts and feel that the sect shouldn't deal with a swordsman who was suppressed just because of his potential. This was a kind of reminder and also a disguised warning. Oh, Qing Xian was very surprised. It seemed that this fellow only killed the Knowledge Chronicle Temple's Weibo after coming to Clear Sky Continent. It didn't seem to be that serious. After all, the Knowledge Chronicle Temple didn't belong to the three clear ones. As for Gentle Breeze and the other two, nothing happened to them. Kusanagi Master said seriously, according to our investigation, the Five Elements Mountain was attacked in the Thousand Chances Valley of the Eastern Sea. A few years before the incident, when the Thousand Chances Valley changed hands, there was a Xianyuan swordsman who went to the Eastern Sea to bring Lady Yin back to the northern region. However, he didn't succeed. After that, your Gentle Breeze and the other two fought with him. After our investigation, we found that the cigarette but had communicated with the late clan leader of Lady and before he left. We estimate that he must have obtained some kind of secret method to control the Thousand Chances Stone Pillar. Although we don't know the actual situation, we can't be wrong. After that, he must have sneaked into the Thousand Chances Valley and tampered with our Five Elements Sacred Mountain, causing it to lose a lot of its spirituality. Let me ask you, when you fought with him, was his Five Elements ability outstanding? Qing Xian nodded. That's right. I found it strange. I've never seen a swordsman who could go so deep into the Five Elements Tao realm in the Jin dance stage. Kusanagi Master said fiercely. That's right. When your Gentle Breeze and the others fought with him, they didn't see his Five Elements ability. How did he improve so much in just a few years? This doesn't conform to the rules of cultivation, unless he converted the spirituality of the Five Elements Sacred Mountain into his own Five Elements ability. Chapter 671. Seeing the indignant looks on the perfected one's faces, Qing Xian still had to comfort them. This was the Taiqing sect's sacred object, not the Shanqing temple's. I've heard that jade can't be turned into a tool if it's not ground. Since it's a sacred object, of course it has to withstand wind and rain. Perhaps after this failure, the Five Elements Sacred Mountain will be reborn in 1,000 years and become even stronger than before. Chao Puzi couldn't help but say, "Stronger my ass." The Five Elements Sacred Mountain is plagued with disasters. Although it's a sacred object of the Taiqing sect, it's been robbed twice by Xianyuan scoundrels. Once, Chao Puzi also felt that he had lost his composure. Without waiting for others to remind him, he stopped talking and took a deep breath. Putting aside the enmity between the three pure ones and Xianyuan, if we don't get rid of this guy, we won't be able to eat or sleep in peace. If you have any requests, we'll give you people, resources, and artifacts. You can choose whatever you want. Qing Xian shook his head. I don't want anything. As long as I know where he usually goes, I'll take care of the rest. This is my duty. Chao Puzi shook his head. Why bother with the rules of the Shanqing sect? Rules are dead, but people are alive. How about this? I'll assign you a few Jin Dan experts. They're all experts and have connections with Xianyuan scoundrels. What do you think? Qing Xian remained silent, but his attitude was very clear. Chao Puzi continued. Why don't you go to the Taiqing sect's treasury and pick a few artifacts? Don't think that Qing Kong isn't as competitive as the Fifth Ring, but he doesn't lose to others in the art of artifacts. There are a few artifacts with special effects that can be used unexpectedly. Have you heard of the Azure Sea Dragon Breath? It's the treasure that Xu Wenfeng and the others used to get that swordsman into the sea beast's stomach. Our Taiqing sect still has a few of these treasures. Qing Xian still didn't say anything. Chao Puzi was a little angry. This guy didn't know what was good for him and was so stubborn. He didn't know why the fifth ring sent him here. All right, I'll give you the news then. According to the information from Xuanyuan's internal channels, this person has to go to the exile place every 3 to 5 years. He should be practicing some kind of martial arts, which requires the environment of the anti-material space. According to our speculation, it should be the art of stars. This Big Dipper scripture is also one of the top cultivation techniques of the 3 pure ones. Among the dozens of Daos of the 3 pure ones, it was enough to rank in the top 3. It's all because of those idiots from the Yuqing sect. Now, it's become the fundamental skill of the swordsman. Furthermore, it's even more profound than the 3 pure ones. Tell me, how many things have the Xianyuan thieves stolen from the 3 pure ones over the past tens of thousands of years? Cultivation methods, secret techniques, treasures, there's nothing they don't want. These thieves, sooner or later, you'll be struck by lightning. Qing Xian had no choice but to remind him, Uncle Master, you mentioned that you have arrived at the place of exile. Kusanagi Master was still angry. So what if it's the place of exile? It was originally a place shared by the 3 pure ones and Xianyuan. One of the entrances was at your Shangqing temple in Xisha. In the end, I don't know what your ancestors were thinking, but they just gave up on this place. Qing Xian shut up and could only listen to Kusanagi Master talk about the past. It was full of blood and tears, as if he had suffered a great loss after venting his anger. Kusanagi Master finally got to the main topic. In the exile place, he stayed for 3 to 5 years. His exact whereabouts are unknown, but according to our understanding of the exile place, he won't stay in the sect. There are no sects in that place that can accept him. He's probably looking for a place to practice. If you go there, how to find him is your own problem. The 3 pure ones haven't placed any pawns in this place for thousands of years. You can only rely on yourself. Qing Xian was pleased, as long as we know where he went after leaving Mount Shao. Since it's to practice his main martial arts, I think his cultivation arrangement will continue for a long time. I don't lack patience, but how do I get in? Do I go back to Xisha and enter through the secret method? Kusanagi Master shook his head. Although there are 2 entrances in the main world, one in Mount Shao and the other in Shangqing Temple, the passage in Shangqing Temple hasn't been used for 10,000 years. How do you get in? Moreover, there's only one exit in the exile place. If you go there, Xianyuan will know. Our suggestion is to directly go through the antimatter space and use the floating raft to locate him. The distance is also very close. Go and prepare. Because we don't know when that cigarette but will leave for the exile place, you should go before him. At least, you have to familiarize yourself with the environment first. This may be a long-term mission. Communication will be inconvenient. You have to be mentally prepared. Qing Xian hesitated for a while, but still expressed his thoughts. Please understand, Uncle Masters. Ever since I came to Qingkong, I've been focusing on the mission and haven't returned to Shangqing Temple. This trip to the exile place is very likely to take a long time. Therefore, before I go to the exile place, I want to return to Shangqing Temple in Xisha. Please allow me. Before Kusanagi Master could answer, the perfected cultivator who had been silent all this time opened his mouth. Okay, I'll write a letter. Take the letter and go to Xisha. After you arrive, you don't have to go back to Nanluo State and waste time. Just let your Shangqing elders send you there. Qing Xian nodded. After confirming the details again, he bowed and bid farewell. After he left, the 3 Pristines temple was silent. After a long time, the only perfected cultivator sighed. The 3 Pristines are one family. In the 5th ring, such backstabbing is not allowed. This person must be escorted to the exile place by Shangqing Temple. Otherwise, if there's any mishap, there will be a rift within the 3 Pristines. The more rifts there are, the less cohesive the three pristines will be. Do you think that with the current strength of Xuanyuan's sword vein, we can still fend them off separately? Everyone lowered their heads and listened to the lecture, including Kusanagi Master who had been acting. To them, the enemy outside was indeed the Xianyuan swordsman. All the swordsmen with potential were the targets of their attention. At the same time, within the three pristines, the conflicts had never been resolved. Now that the sword vein was strong enough to force them to unite in the fifth ring, it was hard to say what the result of the three pristines alliance would be if they didn't have such a strong opponent. Sending cultivators to cooperate and sending artifacts was actually a way to test the cultivator's Dao heart. Unfortunately, Qing Xian's willpower was firm. The Taiqing cultivators were weaker in this aspect. This was also the reason why the Taiqing cultivators were envious of the Shangqing cultivators. Where there were people, there was Jiang Hu. The perfected cultivator said coldly, "Let's talk about the facts. We still have to send people to the exile place. This is not only the mission of the Shangqing, but also the mission of the Taiqing. That Sanjiu, didn't you guys always praise him as the leader of the Jin Dan generation of the Taiqing temple? He's not inferior to any Jin Dan in the fifth ring. Don't hide it. Whether it's a mule or a horse, drag him out for a walk." Xianyuan allowed someone like Cigarette, but to cause trouble all over the world. Even Qing Xian, an outstanding cultivator in the fifth ring, was sent out by the Shangqing temple and ignored. There's no reason why the Taiqing temple can't do the same. He's not a young lady. Aren't you afraid of spoiling him in the mountains? Chapter 672. Lu Xiaoyi did not return to the place of exile immediately. Instead, he continued to wander around Mount Shao. You drank the wine, but you didn't succeed. Spiritual Master Nin stared at him. Beside him was Spiritual Master Cheng, who had just returned from the universe. They were all old acquaintances. One was someone he had been close to for a long time, while the other was the raider who led him into Dao. Lu Xiaoyi was very relaxed. "Martial uncle, it was not easy for me to come back. You don't expect me to be hot-blooded and fight to the death after drinking your wine, do you?" Perfected Cheng smiled. This disciple of his was still as wretched and unconventional as when he was kidnapped. However, there was something different about him. It was the accumulation of countless experiences. It was not the kind of unconventional attitude that he had when he first met him. Instead, it was the kind of unconventional attitude that came after he had some understanding of the great Tao. This was a very profound change. He was very gratified. This proved that he had a good eye. You're still very honorable. You didn't even beat him in your own territory. You even escaped with the help of the beast tide. Lu Xiaoyi did not care. He formed his aura's core 300 years earlier than me. Moreover, he has the yin-yang Dao realm. I don't know where his footwork came from. It was very powerful. My flying sword was not strong enough. The two spiritual masters realized something. They knew Lu Xiaoyi's strength very well. That flying sword was not ordinary. In a head-on confrontation, it was very difficult for anyone to gain an advantage over him. However, there was never a lack of talented people in the cultivation world. If the opponent had a certain level of Dao realm, under the support of the Dao realm, such pure strength would be useless. This was the basic direction of cultivator battles. The cultivation world was developing rapidly. If it was 10,000 years ago, it was unimaginable for Jin Dan to have a Dao realm. However, there was a trend among the few outstanding Jin Dan cultivators now. If you did not understand this Dao realm, it would be difficult for you to display your strength. It was a higher level battle, like the battle at the Yuaning level. You were transferred to Qing Kong from afar. He will not let you go easily. Do you know? Spiritual Master Nan reminded. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. I know, you don't have to worry. I'll give him a surprise. In the Battle of the South Sea, both of us had a chance, but neither of us was confident. Thus, we both chose to use the beast tide as an excuse to stop the battle. He knew that he would definitely come to find me as soon as possible. Because as time passed, my improvement speed was faster than his. He's already at the pinnacle of Jin Dan and has limited space. I'm only at the initial stage of Jindan. My future is bright. He was not trying to flatter himself. There is no need for him to do so in front of the elders of his sect. During the battle with Qing Xian, he did not use his 5 elements ability, including the water attribute Flying Sword in the Water. It was not that he went against his principle of attacking with all his might, but under the opponent's marvelous footwork, if he could not find a way to break it, it would be useless. Unfortunately, at the last moment of the beast's tide, he vaguely understood the situation of the other party's step rafts, but it was already the end of the battle. But it didn't matter. There were plenty of chances. Spiritual Master Nan snorted. Fortunately, you still know that you're at the initial stage of Jindan. I see that you're idle all day, wandering around. People who don't know you might think that you're cultivating your body and mind, preparing to break through to Yuanying. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. This disciple has such a temper. If you ask me to go into seclusion, I'll suffocate to death. My cultivation speed is not good, but it's fast. In another 10 or 20 years, I think I'll be able to reach the middle stage of Jindan. This speed is not slow, right? Spiritual Master Chung ridiculed. That depends on who you're compared to. Your martial uncle Nan and I are considered ordinary. I took 50 years to reach the middle stage of Jindan. Elder Nan took 60 years. You know that Spiritual Master Rui only took 30 years. You've already formed your aura's core for almost 100 years, and you still have the nerve to say that you still need another 10 or 20 years. Comparisons are odious. Comparisons are odious. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. His cultivation state had always been a shortcoming. When he was at Foundation Establishment, he was incomparably slow. When he finally formed his aura's core, he only caught up at the last bus. He didn't expect it to be the same in Jindan. Spiritual Master Nan's expression became serious. We don't care about your matter. How you deal with it is a test of your ability. What I want to tell you is that Qing Xian has already gone to Shanqing Temple in Zaijesha Prefecture. That's where his orthodoxy is. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I understand what you mean. I won't go to Zaijesha, even if you beat me to death. I won't go even if you send me on a mission, Spiritual Master Nan shouted. When did I have this intention? You've cultivated for hundreds of years. Where's your sword heart? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Since the last time I had a long talk with you, this disciple suddenly thought, what is sword heart? Can it be full? Can it survive? So throw it away. Lu Xiaoyi continued his cultivation and continued to practice sword meditation. He spent a lot of time in Fanlu. Here, he could see a lot of ancient books on how to nourish the sword pill in the sea of consciousness. This was also his pursuit. Sword meditation was much faster than he expected. It was due to his experience, his understanding of the 5 elements, and his increasing proficiency in the technique. In the continuous trial, he found the correct path of sword meditation. Nothing was fixed, including the way of sword meditation. The foundation was the 5 elements, but everyone's understanding of the 5 elements was different. It was also different from the inheritance of sword meditation. Lu Xiaoyi didn't memorize it by rote. If his understanding of the 5 elements wasn't deep enough, he could only follow the way he followed the sword stand in the stone room at the bottom of the sea, just like Li Peinan now. But since he already had his own understanding of the 5 elements, of course he would make some changes to make it more suitable for himself. His original expectation was that it would take at least 20 years to succeed in sword meditation, but now it seemed that 10 years was enough. He still frequently went in and out of Shao Mountain, and he didn't care about being noticed by others. Missions, grasslands, and even Zhongma Peninsula. He was waiting for Qing Xian to appear again. Unfortunately, everything was as peaceful as before. 2 years later, he went to the Thousand Islands region. It was a trip, and he wanted to see how Long Ku was doing in Yunding. This was a casual trip, and he didn't tell anyone. He just wanted to secretly observe whether the example he set could really be set up. Would it be hard for him? What made him stunned was that the ice guest had a good life here, unexpectedly good, because he was apprenticed to a rogue cultivator, Jindan. It was he who asked Long Ku to disguise as a rogue cultivator and hide his identity as Xianyuan. So it wasn't a dishonor to be apprenticed to a master outside. That rogue cultivator, Jean Dan, was blind. At least, Lung Ku's safety wasn't a problem. Before his master kicked him out, he was safe. But this guy still made progress. Judging from his breath, there were signs of orus formation, but he didn't remind him. It was good to orus formation outside, which was what cultivators like Lung Ku lacked. Chapter 673. P.S. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes. After staying in Mount Xiao for 5 years, Lu Xiaoyi's cultivation was close to the middle stage of Jindan. His sword plate had also completed the initial stage of coiling, and he was only left with the final stage of transforming into a mustard seed. Both of these were the most important directions of cultivation, one on cultivation, the other on technique. He chose to increase his cultivation first. According to the current situation of the Big Dipper constellation scripture, he should be in the negative space when he stepped out of the initial stage of Jindan. Hence, he asked for leave from Jinren Nan and returned to the exile place. The transition from the initial stage of Jindan to the middle stage was a small barrier. It was purely a change in the accumulation of mana to a certain extent. His Jindan was a little special. It was a colorless 7 points of starlight. It was more difficult to gather spiritual opportunity and convert it into mana. The difficulty lay in the huge energy limit of this Jindan. This made him spend more effort than others to reach the middle stage of Jindan. Of course, there were also benefits. After being purified by the stars, the mana was extraordinarily pure. This was also the reason why he was not at a disadvantage when he fought with those cultivators in the late stage of Jindan. You gain something, you lose something. To complete this small barrier, of course, he needed to be in a good mood. All these years, there was not much progress in the responsibilities on his shoulders. The problem of the grassland people's luck had not been solved, and now there was the exile place. The problem of the education of the low-level disciples in Mount Xiao was still waiting for the idiot Bing Ku to figure it out. Now, there might be a 3 Pure Ones challenger that could appear anytime and anywhere. There were more debts. His choice was to collect the debts that others owed to him first. The Huang Mansion in Jinzhou City was decorated with lanterns and color banners. It was very lively. It was not a new year nor a day of marriage, so it was very eye-catching. However, the locals all knew that this was the most important step in the path of cultivation for the granddaughter of the Huang family. She had successfully built the Dao Foundation, so everyone came to congratulate her. Cultivation families shouldn't be so ostentatious, at least in the blue sky main world. However, in the land of exile, the customs were different. The Huang family's old ancestor had been cultivating his whole life and came to the land of exile alone. Everyone saw the Huang family as a cultivation sect from the main world, but only they knew that other than the Huang family's old ancestor, the others were actually natives of the land of exile. Therefore, even though the celebration of the foundation establishment stage was not worth mentioning in the eyes of the true cultivation aristocratic families, the Huang family's aboriginals still managed to make it sound splendid. This was a joyous occasion, so the old ancestor did not say much. The Huang family's inheritance wasn't flourishing. Under the Jindan old ancestor, there were only 2 sons. The second son died early, leaving only the eldest son who was still at the foundation establishment stage. Looking at his age, it seemed that the Jindan old ancestor had no hope of becoming a foundation establishment cultivator. Hence, he could only be a seeding machine. Under the pressure of the old ancestor, the number of wives and concubines he married had already exceeded the number of his fingers. In the 3rd generation, there were more than 10 males and females. However, excluding the trash who couldn't sense qi, the number of people who could cultivate qi could be counted on one hand. Although they didn't have to worry about resources, being able to cultivate to the peak of the qi refining stage wasn't something everyone could do. Finally, there was still the foundation establishment stage. Hence, for the granddaughter who had always been favored by the old ancestor to have such achievements today, it was equivalent to raising the old ancestor's morale. This proved that his eyesight was outstanding. Hence, he didn't mind sending out congratulatory banners from all directions. Not only did the cultivator clans and sects of Ginkgo come, but more importantly, the fellow disciples of Mount E who were scattered all over the place of exile were also present. Although they were restricted by the rules of the sect and couldn't form groups to establish their own power here, they still maintained contact with each other. If by any chance, they could still help each other. They wouldn't have to beg the sect for help just because of some trivial matters. Establishing a clan here was originally not favored by the sect. They were also very clear about this. When there was a joyous occasion, they naturally had to inform each other. Firstly, it was for the sake of the celebration. Secondly, it was for the younger generation to get to know each other better. Regardless of whether it was the place of exile or the future, having one more friend would always mean one more helping hand. In the rear courtyard of the Huang clan, over 20 young men and women were gathered together, laughing and chatting. Although they were called young men, in reality, they were all above 30 years old. The oldest among them was over 100 years old. However, to cultivators, they were indeed considered proper youths. Among them, Huang Xiaoya was the youngest, not even 30 years old. Naturally, she was also the latest to reach the foundation establishment stage. Today, there were many talented youths who came. It wasn't because the Huang clan had a lot of face, nor was it because the Huang clan's old ancestor was very powerful. Rather, it was because there were very few young female cultivators, especially those who came from clans of the origin world. At the level of low-level cultivators, the demand for Dao companions was very high. This was because there was a high probability that they would be stuck at the foundation establishment stage for the rest of their lives. This was a social circle. In the cultivation world, there were social circles everywhere. There were social circles in the origin world and also in the land of exile. Based on the sect's orthodoxy, based on the distance, and based on the relationship between people, the highest social circle in the land of exile was the sword vein social circle. In any case, that was what they thought. Just like here, the disciples of Ginkgo and the other sects couldn't squeeze in. This was because the cultivators here all had one thing in common, and that was that they all came from the origin world's Mount Yi's inheritance. Of course, even in this social circle, there were different circumstances. For example, the Huang clan had a Jin Dan swordsman ancestor who was still alive, so their status was higher. Even more so, the old ancestor had already passed away, leaving behind a nest of weasels and rats that were worse than the nest of rats. They could only rely on their ancestors to survive in the land of exile. This was also the reason why Huang Xiaoya was so popular. The embroidery room was already filled with gifts, but she didn't care too much. She was more concerned about her future. Little sister Ya, let me introduce you to a friend. I guarantee that he will suit you. A handsome young man led a big fatty to Huang Xiaoya's side. This is Manager Jia of the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce, the largest cultivator's chamber of commerce in the land of exile. He has the authority to decide on the loans for foundation establishment stage cultivators. You guys should get to know each other. Xiaoya is the youngest cultivator from the sword vein in the land of exile. Her future is limitless. Huang Xiaoya had been doted on by her family's ancestors since she was young. Even if she didn't take anything from him, she was still obedient. But with her candid and generous appearance, when she saw the only native cultivator who didn't come from the sword vein, she immediately put away her usual arrogant temperament and became proper and solemn. It wasn't because of the fatty's Jin Dan cultivation, but because of something else. In the land of exile, the swordsmen from the blue sword vein had always been in an awkward position. They were vaguely independent, and no one dared to provoke them. But at the same time, they were secretly ostracized and looked down upon by others. The reason was very simple. As the saying goes, man walks to the top while water flows to the bottom. For cultivators who pursued immortality and power, who didn't want to be born in a world with abundant spiritual opportunity and complete natural laws. If they had a choice, who would want to be born in a world where they could cultivate but could never obtain it, and where there would always be a ceiling. Therefore, they looked down on the swordsmen from Mount E. Wouldn't it be better for them to cultivate in the blue sky of the origin world? Why did they have to come to a place like the land of exile to compete with them for the limited opportunities? Chapter 674. They knew their own sufferings, and they couldn't tell others about it. As the younger generation, they couldn't criticize their ancestors. If their ancestors didn't feel that it was hopeless to form their gold core in blue sky, why would they come to the land of exile to seek opportunities? After all, it was a fact that it was easier to form one's gold core here than in the main world. If their ancestors didn't come here, they wouldn't have started a family, and they wouldn't exist. They would forever be excreted in the morning every day. Therefore, they didn't have a right to blame them. However, their identities were indeed very awkward. In the land of exile, they were regarded as Xuanyuan superior cultivators, but in Mount Shao, they were regarded as a group of cowards who didn't have sword heart and didn't dare to take responsibility. The sect never encouraged cultivators to start a family in the land of exile. It didn't matter if they succeeded in forming their gold core here or not. In blue sky, there were always vacant positions waiting for the swordsman to fill in. Because the outstanding disciples went to the fifth ring, even if they weren't that outstanding, they still had things to do. They guarded various places in the northern region, stayed in Mount Shao to nurture the next generation, and so on. One thing was very clear. Those who stayed in the land of exile were attracted by the greater opportunities for improvement and a more comfortable living environment, and definitely not because of the so-called sword heart. This was a conflict between the collective and the individual, and it could never be reconciled. The sect hoped that all the disciples would be motivated, and if they didn't succeed, they would die for a righteous cause. However, individuals wanted to live longer, have less competition, and have more descendants. Of course, individuals with such a cowardly mentality were in the minority, but the total numbers still formed this kind of moderate scale in the land of exile, and they weren't welcomed by either side. Mount Zhao's attitude towards this group of people was that they wouldn't be expelled from the sect because they didn't betray the sect, and it was just a cultivator's choice. However, they definitely wouldn't encourage it, so they set up many obstacles for their disciples to return as a warning that there was nothing that didn't come with a price. The biggest obstacle was that if they wanted to return to blue sky through the transmission channel, they would have to pay a high toll. This kind of high cost was unbearable even for a family. The disciples of the sword vein that had begun to decline were basically unable to bear this burden, so they couldn't leave the land of exile for the rest of their lives. Also, the surviving families of Jindan were slightly better off. They were able to send some particularly outstanding children over to fulfill their dreams of immortality. The Huang family was not considered rich, but they were not poor either. With their strength, they could barely send out one person. Their final choice was Huang, Xiaoya's half-brother. Even if his talent was not as good as hers, he was still a man. When it came to Huang Xiaoya, she didn't have such good luck. With so many people in the clan wanting to cultivate and survive, she couldn't possibly sell all her belongings to support one person, right? This was also something that the Huang clan's golden core old ancestor had always regretted. He shouldn't have sent his son away, but he should have sent his daughter away. Due to a momentary lapse in thought, that biological grandson of his was still bitterly struggling in the Qi refinement realm, but his granddaughter had already established her Tao foundation. His mistake was that the bloodline could continue as long as there was a seed. The Huang family had many male descendants, but they lacked a cultivator who could stand up in the origin world. Only by standing up in the origin world could they ensure that the Huang family's bloodline was not a simple bloodline of the mortal world. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets. He could no longer afford to send one person to the origin world. The Huang family was not the only one in such a situation. Thus, the new business of lending to the Chamber of Commerce was born. The core of the business was to invest in the disciples of the sword vein with potential, hoping that they could achieve something in the origin world. The returns were generous. The target of the business was the disciples of the sword vein. Cultivators from other sects and forces did not even have the qualifications to go to the origin world. In fact, Xianyuan did not earn much from this. They only had to pay for the cost of passing through the wormhole. However, how could the cost of a wormhole that connected the origin world and the origin world be a small sum? It was just to prevent the loss of their disciples to the land of exile. It was very difficult to apply for such a loan from the Chamber of Commerce. The examination of qualifications was very strict. After all, a single mistake could lead to a loss of everything. Ordinary small businesses could not afford such a loss. In a land of exile, there was only one business that could do this: the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. This young man was able to invite a Jindan shopkeeper from the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. Firstly, his family background was indeed extraordinary. Secondly, it was likely that he had spent a lot of effort. His intentions were self-evident. "Senior, thank you for coming to this little girl's congratulatory banquet. Please wait for a moment. I will invite my ancestor." When cultivators interacted, the most important thing was equality. The other party was a Jindan. Even if he was a Jindan from the land of exile, he was still a Jindan. Inviting the ancestor was a sign of respect. Otherwise, others would laugh at her Huang family for being rude. Moreover, there were some words that a Jindan ancestor would be more effective than a mere foundation establishment cultivator like her. However, the fatty Jindan waved his hand to stop her. "No need. We business people do not pay attention to that. We only look at the other party's aptitude and do not talk about friendship. If you call your ancestor here and I feel that he is not qualified, wouldn't it be difficult for me? At that time, should I agree? Or should I not? It'd be better to leave now." The fatty made a gesture to leave. Huang Xiaoyu was incomparably embarrassed. The young man hurriedly stopped him. He gave Huang Xiaoyu a look and tried to persuade her. "Senior He, why do you take it so seriously? It's just that we young people are afraid of treating you badly, so we want the adults in our families to come out and receive you. Since you don't want to, then don't call. But for the sake of the adults in your family, please stay for a bit." Fatty he stopped. Although his expression was not arrogant, the style of the businessman was very repulsive. However, most of the young cultivators here had a request for him. Who would dare to say anything? The young man was called Zhou Xiangdao. He came from the most prestigious swordsman family in the land of exile. Because his great-great-great-grandfather had achieved yuanying here, he was one of the only two in the sword vein in the land of exile. Therefore, when he stood up for the Zhou family, he still had some face. After coaxing Fatty, he with great difficulty, the other side came to coax Huang Xiaoya. Women, after all, were more narrow-minded. Sometimes, they loved to throw tantrums regardless of the occasion. If they really threw tantrums, this Fatty he really dared to turn around and leave. In the midst of the commotion, another person sent in a congratulatory note. Originally, this kind of matter did not require Huang Xiaoya, the master, to step forward, as the servants of the family would take care of it. However, because of Fatty's bluntness, she could only find some other things to cover up. Thus, she took the congratulatory note and opened it. A box of 4 colored snacks, and then it was gone. Today was the day of her foundation establishment. The people who came to congratulate her did not come empty-handed. The gifts they brought were also extremely precious. Everyone knew that cultivators had high standards. If the gifts were too light, then it would be better not to come. Not to mention cultivators, even the gifts sent by the nobles in the city did not have 4 colored snacks. This was the level of gifts between peddlers, and they dared to send it here. Huang Xiaoyu was not a person who loved money. Usually, she did not care about these things. If it was another occasion, she would probably just laugh. But today, she was a little worried. Chapter 675. However, in the end, he was a person who had built his Tao foundation. His state of mind was still somewhat stable, so he wouldn't get angry just because of this. What if these 4 colored snacks were not ordinary snacks? There are often such things in the cultivation world. In order to show modesty, or simply to pretend, they would downplay something that was obviously very precious. It was clearly a treasure, but they had to write it as rags. It was clearly a heavenly treasure, but they had to write it as a cow's yellow dog's treasure, and so on. Let me see the things. Hearing the young Mrs. orders, the servants brought the gift box over and found a quiet place. Only Zhou Xiangdao dared to shamelessly follow. She didn't care. After all, it was just a worldly possession. She was just using it to hide the annoyance in her heart. She had a premonition that this loan would not go smoothly. Zhou Xiangdao was very attentive. Although he came from a big family had its difficulties. There were many disciples like him, and he had to fight for everything himself. Resources, opportunities, and even a Tao companion. But no one would give it to him for free. Carefully opening the gift box, 4 colored items were revealed. At first glance, they were indeed 4 kinds of snacks. Ice skin moon cake, hibiscus lotus cake, honey spring roll, wine fermented peach cake. Seeing Huang Xiaoya frown, Zhou Xiangdao still comforted her. It looks like a snack, but the smell is somewhat different. Could it be that there is something strange about it? Sister Ya, why don't you try it? How about this? I'll try it first and see what kind of precious medicine it is. After obtaining the approval of the beauty, Zhou Xiangdao picked up a piece and did not destroy the whole thing. It was just that the appearance of this box of snacks was not good, and there were some fragments. He picked up one of the fragments and put it in his mouth, carefully savoring the aftertaste. His expression was very strange. Huang Xiaoya was impatient. What is this? Is it a great medicine? Why does it look exactly like a snack? Her temper was anxious. Seeing that Zhou Xiangdao wanted to say something but hesitated, she simply picked up a piece and put it in her mouth. As soon as it entered her mouth, she immediately spat it out. Zhou Xiangdao, this is clearly an expired snack. You still don't want to say it and have to pretend to know the business. It's disgusting. She shouted to the servant. Where is he? Take me to see him. Since he dared to make fun of me on such a joyous occasion, I'll teach him a lesson today. Zhou Xiangdao followed behind her and tried to explain, but this woman did not listen to a single word he said. How could he have imagined that someone would dare to make such a joke on such a day? Usually, people would immediately turn hostile, let alone give it to a cultivator. Even a joke couldn't be made like this, could it? The two of them left the inner residence and arrived at the garden outside the courtyard. There was a man standing under a peach tree in the distance with a sword on his back. He was plucking peaches. It was the ***** festival. This peach tree was also a special species. It was the favorite of their grandfather. Ordinary people would not dare to pluck it, even on such a big day like this. Her grandfather only allowed her to pick 20. Who was this person? Not only did he send expired pastries, he even took advantage of her by picking peaches and openly putting them into his storage ring. There was no one guarding the peach tree because all cultivators knew the rules. But now, he met someone who didn't know the rules. Stop! Which thief dares to be so impudent in my Huang estate? Does my Huang estate owe you anything? Zhou Xiangdao was full of anger. But after seeing the back of this person with a sword on his back and the aura of a foundation establishment cultivator, he knew that he was also a member of this circle. His anger dissipated by more than half, but his words were still very strict. The host doesn't allow it, so the guest dares to be impudent? Which family are you from? Why are you so unrestrained? The person plucking peaches put the last few peaches into his storage ring and turned his head with a smile. Doesn't your Huang family owe me? You owe me 5 days and 5 nights of hard work. What? Huang Xiaoya, you forgot so quickly. You don't want to admit it? Seeing this person's face, Huang Xiaoya's aura immediately weakened by 30%. After all, she had schemed to make this person take the blame for the dragon boat race. Originally, she wanted to compensate him after the race, but she didn't expect that this dead person would run off to who knows where after the race. Stop. That peach is grandfather's favorite. You can't pick it. If you want compensation, I'll give it to you. Lu Xiaoyi stopped his hand with a smile. Hee hee, it's good that you remember. It wasn't in vain that I helped you back then. Xiaoya, you've reached the foundation establishment stage. Congratulations. Huang Xiaoya said hatefully. You're congratulating me with expired snacks like this? Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. Expired? No, right? It was still fresh when I put it in my storage ring. We cultivators don't have to be so formal. When the gift is here, the thought is here. Everything else is not important. What? You're not going to bring me in to have some fun? Huang Xiaoya had no choice. They were all on the same side, so she couldn't do anything to him. Only her grandfather's peaches. She didn't know how to explain it later. The two of them led the way, and Zhou Xiangdao quietly asked, Sister Ya, who is this person? Is he familiar with you? Is he also a descendant of the sword vein? But with my wide circle of friends, I don't think I've seen such a person in the famous sword vein clan. What's his name? Only then did Huang Xiaoya remember that after knowing him for so many years, she still didn't know his surname. Hey, what's your name? You're hiding your head and tail. Lu Xiaoyi said casually. My surname is Fei. My given name is Chai. Why didn't your aunt tell you? The three of them walked to the back courtyard, and Zhou Xiangdao became more and more suspicious. He was a person who liked to make friends, and because of his background, people would try to curry favor with him. Therefore, he had a wide circle of connections in the Sword Vein clans in the exile area, but he had never heard of Fei clan. Did he sneak in? What was his goal? He decided to test him more. He had to dig out his background. Of course, he didn't think that this guy was here to cause trouble. If he dared to cause trouble in the Sword Vein clan, then he must be tired of living. However, he couldn't rule out the possibility that a disciple from an outside force wanted to use this opportunity to enter the Sword Vein clan. Lu Xiaoyi easily blended into the Sword Vein clan because everyone was carrying a sword case. Other than the fatty Jean Dan, he didn't pay much attention to them. He was here to collect debts. Of course, he wasn't here to collect debts from Huang Xiaoya, but from her aunt, Shui Xian. From his point of view, collecting debts would help him balance his mind and body. It would help him to use a more relaxed mood to welcome the middle stage of Jean Dan. The reason why he wanted to attend this gathering was that he happened to be here at the right time. It was impolite to go to someone's mansion and use his divine sense to investigate. After all, the owner was still his senior brother in name, even though their positions in the sect were worlds apart. He had to choose a peaceful and unobtrusive way to enter. The most natural way was to attend this foundation establishment celebration. As for the gift, it was something he casually took out from his storage ring without opening the packaging. He didn't know that he would encounter such a situation, so he couldn't have prepared it in advance. Besides, what right did he have? This little girl made him work hard for 5 days and 5 nights, and she didn't even show any appreciation. Was it overdue? Maybe. The way he put the food was rather crude, and he didn't pay attention to the categories. It was a mixture of raw and cooked food, and it might have been a bit too long. It wouldn't kill anyone. Wasn't it still hairless? Chapter 676. What are you doing here? Are you here to disgust me? I'm warning you. If you reveal the fact that I didn't participate in the Dragon Boat competition, then there will be no compensation. Huang Xiaoya threatened him first. She suspected that the reason this guy chose such a special time was to extort her. She didn't care about these treasures, but she cared about her face. He wasn't willing to lower his head under coercion. And what about those peaches? What a coincidence. Where's Auntie? Why don't I see her? On your big day, shouldn't she represent the family to help you entertain the guests? Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be unintentional, but someone as intelligent as Huang Xiaoya was especially sensitive in this regard. Why are you looking for my aunt? Are you plotting something? I'm warning you. Fei Chai, if you want to have bad thoughts here, I'm afraid you won't be able to leave this door. When my grandfather gets angry, he won't care which family you are from. Lu Xiaoyi played it down. These things are not easy to say, so he had to be tactful. Everyone was a civilized person. Well, after you ran away, your aunt refused to let me go no matter what. She begged me to participate in the competition for you, but why? So your aunt promised me a lot of benefits, and now I'm back to get the benefits. Huang Xiaoyi was skeptical. She knew her aunt very well. She was really a good housekeeper. She wished she could break a spirit stone into 2 pieces and spend it on her own. She would do everything herself and never make random wishes, much less be a sucker for a fool. She often said that a spirit stone was a non-renewable resource, but humans could be reborn. After a night of sleep, their strength would return, and they would have an inexhaustible supply. How could a person with such a personality casually agree to his request? Just as he was about to retort, he suddenly thought of something. Could it be that Annie had a relapse and used the resources that she could regenerate? This guy, how dare he? Anger rose from her heart. This time, Huang Xiaoya's face was really cold. This stinking, shameless person, he actually dared to openly look for such a dirty thing. She had already decided to find an opportunity to let these friends around her teach him a lesson. There were many ways, but the most natural one was a sword duel. Even if he couldn't kill him, he had to stab him a few times to vent his anger, for himself and for his aunt's renewable resources. As for the dragon boat race, she had long forgotten about it. This was exactly what Zhou Xiangdao wanted. He had long disliked this brat and was worried that he wouldn't have a chance. He was also afraid that Huang Xiaoyu would be angry. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he not do his best? In his eyes, anyone who got close to Huang Xiaoya was his enemy. As for which family he belonged to, he had asked around earlier, but no one knew who he was. He was definitely not from one of the big families with the sword vein in the exile. If he was from one of those small, declining families, why would he pay attention to him? She returned to Lu Xiaoyi's side. She had to calm him down first. This guy was very cunning. She didn't want him to think that things were not going well. It would be bad if he slipped away. She needed to bait him with words. My aunt. She went back to her mother's house. According to the rules of the exile, after a woman has lost her husband for 10 years, her husband's family can no longer tie her down. She has to choose whether she wants to stay in her husband's family to fulfill her filial piety or return to her mother's family to remarry. This is the truth. I'm not lying to you. Even if you live here, you won't be able to wait for her. Huang Xiaoyu paid close attention to this guy's expression. Sure enough, she saw that he had a disappointed look on his face, which confirmed her suspicions. She wasn't lying, this was the truth, but she wouldn't say where her aunt's family was. In the Huang family, very few people knew about this. With this reason, she wasn't afraid that this guy wouldn't stay here. And then, sure enough, this guy's next sentence was, "Then, where's your aunt's family? It's not appropriate to owe this debt like this. How about you tell me, and I'll find it myself. As for what you owe me, you can use the peach to pay it off. Look, I have so much dafa." Huang Xiaoya's anger grew. This guy actually wanted to take advantage of both sides. How could there be such an insatiable cultivator in this world? No hurry, no hurry. When the gathering is over, I'll naturally tell you. Besides, it's not appropriate for you to leave halfway. There are so many friends here, and it's not easy for us to get together. It's a rare opportunity. Zhou Xiangdao's ability to get things done was impressive. He quickly made the arrangements and found a few older Foundation establishment cultivators who had a certain level of attainment in flying swords. They couldn't be compared to the real swordsmen of Mount E. Whether it was in terms of resources or skills, they were far from the real swordsmen. But in the exile, this level of skill was still acceptable. Facing a nameless brat, there was no problem. The two of them communicated with their divine senses. Huang Xiaoyu then calmed the crowd with her sword and made a suggestion. Everyone, since this is a gathering of swordsmen, of course there will be sword fighting. Next, let's invite the hero to come down and demonstrate his skills for everyone. Whether it is solo performance or a duel, it'll be a good opportunity for everyone to verify what they've learned. Zhou Xiangdao had arranged for people below. Moreover, in such an occasion, sword fighting was a very normal thing. It was abnormal for swordsmen to gather together to play zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. It was a morning and evening program, but the host had brought it forward. Everyone cheered, but before Huang Xiaoyu could announce the start, a discordant voice rang out. They had no choice but to listen, because the one who spoke was the only Jin Dan present, Fatty He. Swordsmen are all extraordinary. At all times, sword fighting is the most important thing. This old man really admires them. But this old man doesn't understand sword fighting, so it's really difficult. I'm in a hurry here. Why don't we get down to business first and let everyone have fun? His so-called business was to determine if the people present had the qualifications to be invested in by the Green Vines Merchant Guild. This was an important matter. Of course, it was more important than sword fighting, but no one doubted it. This time, Huang Xiaoya's celebration was very attractive because she knew that the manager of the Green Vines Merchant Guild would be coming. Many of the Sword Vein disciples came here not only to celebrate with her, but also to see if they had the potential to be invested in the Green Vines Merchant Guild. Normally, there weren't many opportunities like this. After all, the other party was a Jin Dan, so it wasn't easy to meet him, especially since there were many disciples of fallen families here. They wanted to use this opportunity to make a comeback. What if the heavens opened their eyes and gave them a chance to go to Mount E to study? No rush, no rush. One by one, Fatty, he took out a strangely shaped object. It looked like a tall crown, and after fiddling with it a few times, he explained, "I have a divination instrument here. In a moment, it will be placed on the head of each person who wants to be tested. Do you see that cat's eye stone? If the cat's eye stone shines, then you have the qualifications to be sponsored by the Green Vines Merchant Guild. If it doesn't, then I'm sorry, you have no fate with the Green Vines Merchant Guild. It's fair and square. So who'll go first?" Chapter 677. A very ordinary cultivator walked over. Under the gazes of everyone, he put on the tall crown and the Heaven's Performance Ritual Square. Nothing happened, so he was at a loss. Thus, he began to clench his teeth and gather his strength. His face was red, but there was still no movement. Fatty, he smiled and said, "No need to rush, and no need to use strength. This is not a test of magic power, nor is it a test of the soul. It is a mystery that you have not come into contact with. So, just put it on, and the result will be clear." The cultivator went down dejectedly with a sad expression. There was no reaction from the tall crown, which could only mean that he did not have the qualifications. Although he was unwilling, he could not say anything in this situation. Soon after, another 6 or 7 cultivators came up. Some of them were bright, some were not, but the probability of them being bright was not high. Among these people, only 2 of them were qualified to get the loan. No one could understand the principle of the Heaven's Performance Instrument. In any case, it looked very high-end, except for one person. Lu Xiaoyi also did not understand the principle of the instrument, but he could see the condition of the instrument. This was also something that he could not figure out. He looked at Huang Xiaoya beside him and said, "Xiaoya, if you don't tell me the whereabouts of your aunt, I'm afraid you won't be able to get the loan this time." Huang Xiaoya was very principled. "I would rather not go to the main world's Mount E than betray my family." Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. "Why do you say that I am a bad person?" "Xiaoya, you might have misunderstood. I'm not going to harm your auntie, and your auntie doesn't seem to not welcome me, does she?" Huang Xiaoya gritted her teeth in her heart. Sure enough, her aunt was forced to pay a renewable resource. "Because of this, I can't tell you. It will save other people's innocence from being ruined by a perverted lecher like you." Lu Xiaoyi was very serious. He could see that this little girl was already suspicious, so he did not hide anything. Everyone opened the window and spoke frankly. "How is this perverted? If I were to seduce you, it would be normal for me to curry favor with you like that, Zhou Jiazi. It would be abnormal for your aunt to do it. What kind of logic is this? Everyone has the right to pursue happiness. You have it, and so does your aunt. Just because your aunt is older than you doesn't mean that her happiness isn't as important as yours. This world wouldn't revolve around anyone. Helping others is also a virtue." Lu Xiaoyi was spouting nonsense here, but Huang Xiaoyi was able to see through his essence with a single glance. "If you want to marry my aunt, I'll tell you where she is. If it's just for fun, then I won't tell you. What do you think?" Lu Xiaoyi was defeated. Although the little girl was young, she was still an adult in her 20s. Especially in this aspect, she had a clear understanding of things and was not easy to deceive. Therefore, he changed it to a threat. "If you tell me, I can help you go to the origin world. There will be more possibilities, a broader future, a better future, countless resources, countless skills, and a real swordsman to teach you. But if you insist on being stubborn, I'm afraid you won't be able to get past this. Don't even think about the qualifications to lend money. That hat is on your head. Even if you use all your strength, it won't light up. Huang Xiaoya proudly raised her chin, not being subdued by evil forces. The process was very fast. After putting on the crown, the result was out. Soon, it was Huang Xiaoya's turn. However, after a little twist and turn, the little girl threw away her thoughts of success and failure and walked up Dafa. Seeing this, Lu Xiaoyi secretly nodded. This little girl had the aptitude, but she was a little impatient and rigid. She just had to compete with him. The tall crown was put on, but there was no light. After a few breaths of time, without anyone urging her, Huang Xiaoya took off the crown herself and calmly said, "It seems that I have no fate with the Green Vine Merchant Guild. Many thanks for Master He's hard work. I've disappointed you, but there will be a generous gift for you later." Lu Xiaoyi calmly watched this farce, his mind spinning. The two people who were chosen by the Green Vine Merchant Guild both had destiny in their minds. It was very weak and lifeless, but there was no doubt that it was destiny. It seemed that this was the reason why the Green Vine Merchant Guild chose people to invest in. Huang Xiaoya did not participate in the Dragon Bow competition, so of course she did not have the opportunity to stand on the stage and receive the Dragon God's blessing. Therefore, it was normal that she was not chosen. Then, if he were to stand on it, would the crown shine like a searchlight? This Green Vine Merchant Guild was very interesting. Using this method to send a seed with destiny to the azure sky, was it good intentions? Or did they have other intentions? It was still impossible to judge. He did not want to alert the enemy. Although shopkeeper, he was a Jin Dan cultivator. His skills were mediocre. It was impossible for him to be the real owner of the crown. It required at least a Taoist master or above to play with it, or even higher. Judging from his appearance, he was probably just a user standing at the front desk. He did not know much about the inside story. If he was frightened, he would lose this hard-won clue. He needed to cast a long line to catch a big fish. Anyway, there was time. With Fatty He in the Green Vine Merchant Guild, it was better than the blind man touching the elephant. Huang Xiaoyi was not affected at all. She firmly believed that if her future was to be in Mount E, then she would definitely go. If not, then accompanying her family in exile was also not bad. Even if she was here, there was also yuanying, which was also not bad. Therefore, the plan was still the same. Azure Sky could not go for the time being, but it was urgent to punish the lecher. Cultivators, especially me, swordsmen, do not judge a hero by success or failure. We only judge by the sword. The sword skills are still the same. Which friend wants to go first? Zhou Xiangdao's shill immediately jumped out. According to the plan, he would first demonstrate himself, then pretend to find an opponent to compare with, and then teach them a lesson. This was the established procedure. Before he could open his mouth, a sudden explosion sounded in the sky. A black cloud pressed down, and a fierce wind blew. It was mixed with hail and rocks, and the momentum was very fast. With just a slight sweep, the flowers and plants in the Huang Mansion's courtyard were all destroyed, including the precious peach tree. Leaves fell and branches were broken, and the ground was littered with broken peaches. Seeing this, Lu Xiaoyi sighed and regretted that he did not pluck enough of them. The foundation establishment cultivators all covered their heads and faces, trying their best to withstand the fierce wind. They could not fly because of the terrifying spiritual pressure. They also could not use their swords because they could not identify their target. They only knew that there was a monster hiding in the black cloud, and it was not something they could defend against. They had something to rely on. This was Ginku, the Huang Mansion. There was a Jin Dan swordsman in charge, and there was more than one. Sure enough, just as the strange wind blew, 3 figures came out from the meditation room, accompanied by 3 rays of sword light. Like 3 dragons, they slashed towards the black cloud. The sky was filled with a thunderous voice. That was the voice of the Huang family's ancestor. Black Cloud Monster. There is a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There is no door to hell, but you want to throw yourself into it. You dare to cause trouble in the Huang Mansion. leave your life behind. Chapter 678. However, there was no sound coming from the black cloud. Its form could not be seen. Only a few tentacles could be seen waving around, and the flying swords could not even get close to it. The entire black cloud moved abnormally fast, like a black nebula. Its movements were completely unpredictable. It was impossible to imagine how such a huge black cloud could move so quickly. It was also impossible to know what was hidden in the black cloud. Was it a monster? Was it a human's primordial soul? Or was it something else? He only knew that the three-gene Dan swordsman could not do anything to it. On the contrary, one swordsman took the risk to get close and used the heaven-measuring sword ruler. As a result, he was suddenly hit by a tentacle and was seriously injured. The sword was too slow. The enhancement of the power was barely enough. It did not even have the slight enhancement of the Tao realm. With such swordsmanship, even a 5-ring cultivator could not compare to a small sex spell cultivator. However, as long as one considered that these cultivators had barely formed their core in a place like the land of exile, it was not surprising. What was in the black cloud? Lu Xiaoyi did not know either. Even if his divine sense was strong, he could not see through this layer of black fog. It was as if it did not have a real body at all. Those so-called tentacles that appeared and disappeared mysteriously were just randomly generated by the black cloud. They were not real tentacle monsters. They could also transform into other forms of attack, such as a big mouth or a pair of sharp claws. However, just because he could not see it did not mean that he could not sense it. This was not something that was born in the realm's star body. As a small cultivator who often traveled in the universe, he was not unfamiliar with all kinds of void beasts in the universe. Just from the way the black cloud moved, he could be very sure that it was a void beast because of its strong, starry sky aura. Its movement was also a type of star system, but it was an instinct unique to void beasts. This kind of ability was still limited in the atmosphere. When it was in outer space, it was even more unpredictable. Void beasts could appear in the realm. This was not the ability of void beasts. Especially young void beasts like this, they did not have the ability to freely enter and exit the void of the universe. Therefore, they must have been brought in by humans. However, no one knew what their purpose was. Among all the beasts, the void beasts were the most unwilling to be controlled by humans. There was basically no solution. They yearned for freedom and lived in the void, so they could only slowly degenerate and deteriorate in the domain. Therefore, there were only two outcomes for void beasts like this that were captured and controlled by humans. They would either deteriorate and die in the domain, or they would rush out of the sky and return to the void after reaching adulthood. Before they left, they might even bite back at their master. However, to the cunning humans, some ancient sects had the ability to tame beasts, so they weren't afraid of these things. After using them for a period of time, they could just kill or release them and find new young beasts. In any case, there were plenty of such beasts in the deep space, so why must they develop feelings for them? Lu Xiaoyi wasn't here to watch the show. He wasn't that shallow. His attention was focused on his surroundings as far as possible. His goal was to find the possible controller. That was the key to solving the problem. Unfortunately, he couldn't find it. Furthermore, he didn't discover any suspicious spiritual fluctuations that were connected to the black cloud. There was only one possibility. This black, cloud-shaped void beast had basic intelligence. To its master, it was an autonomous weapon that could be ignored after being released. There was no point in waiting. There were only 2 Gene Dan swordsmen left in the sky. They were also defending more than attacking, so they were in a difficult situation. Among them, the Huang family's ancestors' thunderous voice rang out again. Leave the residence quickly. Split up and leave. He didn't really understand the true intention of this void beast. His Huang family wasn't a family that liked to stir up trouble, so it was impossible for them to provoke enemies outside the universe. Why would such a thing attack the Huang family? However, considering the rumors in the exile area in recent years, Even if he knew that it could be a coincidence, he had to prepare for the worst. Before he finished speaking, a ball of light suddenly exploded on the ground. It was brilliant, but not dazzling. It was close yet far away, as if a main star in the sky had suddenly erupted. In the next moment, the black cloud seemed to have been pierced by a star. It was like a black cloth bag that had been pierced with countless holes, emitting thousands of rays of starlight. Finally, there was movement. The black cloud let out an ear-piercing shriek. Although they didn't understand the meaning behind the shriek, they could feel the intense emotions in the shriek: death, destruction, unwillingness. The black cloud twisted and changed its shape continuously. It was like a ball of dough that was being kneaded here and there, struggling uncontrollably. In the next moment, it collapsed and turned into countless wisps of black smoke. It was blown away by the wind and gradually disappeared. Only a sparkling flying sword was left. With a nimble turn, it fell into the sword box of Cultivator. A large empty space appeared around Lu Xiaoyi. The Foundation establishment stage, Cultivator's eyes were filled with fear and confusion. Especially Huang Xiaoya and Zhou Xiangdao, their expressions were especially interesting. They couldn't understand and couldn't react in time. They only knew that this person's flying sword was completely different from the flying sword they imagined. But it was indeed a flying sword. They didn't have much experience, but the Jin Dan cultivators did. 2 Jin Dan cultivators carried the heavily injured cultivator and landed in front of him, bowing together. Huang Ju, Zhou Ting, and Mo Xiangqian greet the envoy inspector. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. Is this the first time this thing has appeared in the land of exile? Why haven't I heard of it before? Huang Ju was the host, so of course he was the one to answer. It's not the first time. The first time it appeared was 4 years ago. A native sect in the land of exile was attacked and suffered heavy casualties. It was this thing's fault. Then, there were 2 or 3 cases of monsters attacking human cultivation sects and clans every year. Yuanian cultivators were also sent out to search, but the monsters were cunning and came and went without a trace. Their targets were also completely irregular, so the search was unsuccessful. Lu Xiaoyi asked again, how many times did it attack the swordsman? Huang Ju answered, twice. This thing has appeared a total of 10 times. The second time, and the current target, is my Sword Vein clan. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. You guys don't have any suspects? Huang Ju was ashamed. It's related to the Void Beast, so there's really no way to suspect. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the heavily injured swordsman Jin Dan. Mo Xiangqian, since you called out this name, why did you charge forward so recklessly? Mo Xiangqian was extremely ashamed. He was a little impulsive. Under the circumstances of not knowing the enemy's situation, this was not something a mature cultivator should do. They were also very surprised by the sudden appearance of their savior. They did not know how he knew that the monster would appear today. Or was it purely a coincidence? The news of Mount E sending the envoy inspector to the land of exile had been spread more than 10 years ago, but no one had seen this person before. Everyone was terrified and felt insecure. But this boot just did not fall. They also knew that the envoy inspector was very young and was a true elite from the 5th ring, but they did not expect him to be so powerful. The Void Beast that had beaten the 3 of them into a sorry state was just a sword to him. This was the real Xianyuan swordsman, and it was an external sword. They did not know how powerful the real internal sword would be when it arrived. But this had nothing to do with them anymore. Ever since they settled down in the land of exile, the glory of Xianyuan no longer belonged to them. What was left behind was a lifetime of regret, and the regret that came back to him in the middle of the night. Chapter 679. Just keep him. It's not a big deal. Lu Xiaoyi didn't have any panacea for him. If he didn't experience pain once, he wouldn't learn his lesson. I want the most detailed information about the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce, no matter how big or small it is. Get it done quickly. Although they were all Gold Core Realm cultivators, their statuses in the sequence of Mount E could not be mentioned in the same breath. The difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. This was a cruel fact. Therefore, even though the three of them wished they could be twice as old as him, they could only accept his teachings obediently, not daring to have any doubts. He looked at the peach tree again. What a pity. The people around him were very restrained. He didn't like it, but he couldn't control it. Looking at Fatty Dow's fawning eyes, he couldn't help but ask, I think this girl is quite talented. Why don't you reconsider? Fatty's heart was beating like a drum. He didn't know what to do. Although he had formed his Dan for a long time, this was the first time he saw a real Xianyuan swordsman in action. His intuition about the ability of Xianyuan swordsmen was mainly based on these resident swordsmen. He could observe them in action. To be honest, he didn't think much of it. Knowing someone by reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. There were too many deceivers in the cultivation world. If one did not meet them in person, one would not be convinced. Therefore, he still had some doubts about the ability of the real Xianyuan swordsmen. They were definitely stronger than those who stayed in the exile, but how much stronger could they be? The battle this time had truly broadened his horizons. Just one strike. He didn't even see the trace of the sword before it hit. This speed was too terrifying. The most shocking thing was that all the cultivators in the universe knew that the real backbone of Xianyuan was the inner sword. If the outer sword was already so powerful, how powerful would the inner swordsman be? It was unimaginable. On one side was the ability to crush and completely control life and death. On the other side was the persistence of the business for hundreds of years. It was really difficult for him to choose. He hadn't sweated for hundreds of years, but now he felt that his forehead was slightly wet. He clenched his teeth and said with difficulty, The Heavens Performance Instrument has determined that this woman is not qualified. This is the business principle of the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. This old man has limited power, so I can't act on my own. I can only report to the Chamber of Commerce and let the big shots decide. This loan is too large. Even our Green Vine Merchant Guild can't afford to suffer too much loss. Otherwise, the entire guild will be in trouble. We have thousands of shops and tens of thousands of employees. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. If you refuse, then just refuse. What's the point of saying so much? Green Vine has 1 million men. It's none of my business. He then smiled and looked at Huang Xiaoya. Xiaoya, where did your aunt go? Can you tell me now? She knew that this person would definitely ask her again. So how should she answer? This guy wasn't a foundation establishment cultivator, but rather Jean Dan. And it was the elite Jean Dan of the Holy Lands Mount E. He was a person who had the authority to make decisions for the disciples under him. He was a true expert who could move the wind and clouds with his sword. They were the enforcers of discipline in the land of exile. Inspecting discipline? Shouldn't they be upright first? What right did this guy, who was always thinking about other people's ants, have to inspect discipline? Could it be that only perverted people could use perverted swords? Huang Xiaoya didn't dare to question him out loud. She only secretly made up her mind that one day, the heavens would pity her and let her go to Mount E. She would definitely report him and make him suffer. But now, she still had to make a choice. I don't know. This was a laughable insistence because it was meaningless. She knew very well that with this person's status as an envoy inspector, if he asked her grandfather, he would definitely reveal her aunt's whereabouts without hesitation. At the same time, he would also say, What do you think of my Huang family making another granddaughter's bed? Lu Xiaoyi sighed again. They all had a Tao heart. For the sake of business, for the sake of family, they would rather die than submit. They were all fearless. The sword could cut people, but it couldn't cut the heart. His interest waning, he said to Huang Ju, I'm going to the city to relax. Once I've gathered the information on the Green Vine Company, I'll send it over immediately. The 3 Jean Dan were very fast. That night, Huang Ju found the envoy inspector drinking at Chui Chui restaurant and handed him a jade scroll. Envoy, do you need us to use our local forces to investigate this Green Vine Company? Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. This is not your duty. If you do it too obviously, it will be a bad thing. Just forget about this matter. Huang Ju was a little hesitant. Lu Xiaoyi understood his thoughts and comforted him. Don't worry, it's not a big deal. It has nothing to do with your survival here. Also, I think that little girl of yours is not bad. Send her to Mount E. Tell her that I said I would allow her to pass as an exception. The envoy inspector always had some privileges. For example, he could bring someone along. It was better to be in charge than to be in charge, so why not use this privilege? If there were too many people, it would go against the sex principles. However, one or two was not a problem. As for Annie Narcissus, she was just a memory in his life. Cultivators placed the most importance on fate. If one was too deliberate, they would lose the upper hand. He was also not a person who liked to disturb the normal lives of others. After studying the information on the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce, he couldn't find anything. He only knew that this Chamber of Commerce was very old, with tens of thousands of years of history. The owner had long been unknown. Based on the current structure, it was a union of dozens of large merchants. Whenever a new business force appeared, they would adopt a method of integration. They relied on this method to maintain the strength of the Green Vine Chamber of Commerce. As for whether there were people with ulterior motives, it was very troublesome to investigate in detail. Just from this kind of behavior, it was not possible to determine whether they had good or bad intentions. It would be normal if it was the Blue Sky sect that sent the seeds of fate to the main world for free. However, if it was the land of exile, it was very abnormal. What were they planning? If one were to link the people of the grassland with the land of exile, there must be a lot of bad intentions. Could it be that there was a group of people who were silently, without complaints, and were willing to waste resources to support Xin Yuan? Was it possible? He was sure that people at the level of Fatty he were not involved. Otherwise, he would not have rejected him in the Huang mansion. If they wanted to scheme in the dark, they must be laughing on the surface. This was a matter of two sides of the same coin. There must be someone at a higher level behind the scenes. What was their purpose? Was it the sect Xin Yuan, or the Blue Sky sect, or the entire Five Rings bandit group? Although there was no concrete evidence yet, Lu Xiaoyi felt that he could not hide it for too long. His personal strength was powerless in the face of such a huge conspiracy. The strange fate of Sand Planet, Blue Beard of Whirling Planet, the grassland of Blue Sky, and the land of exile. He vaguely felt that this was a big conspiracy against the Five Rings bandit group. This was the biggest possibility. As for why such fate appeared in Blue Sky, the reason was actually very simple. The core of the Five Rings bandit group was the three great masters, the three pure ones, and Xin Yuan. Two of the three great masters, the three pure ones, and Xin Yuan, were from Blue Sky. If they did not come here, where would they come from? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.